This hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. Today, the committee is holding its second oversight hearing of the Federal Bureau of Prisons in as many years, and the first hearing in either chamber of Congress with Director Colette Peters, who was sworn in as Bureau of Prisons' new director last month. Congratulations. Director Peters, you've been appointed to lead the Bureau of Prisons at a time of great challenge and opportunity. It's no overstatement to say that in recent years, the Bureau has been riddled with mismanagement and sadly with scandal. Under the Bureau's previous leadership, we witnessed an inadequate response to the COVID-19 pandemic, rampant misconduct by BOP officials, chronic staffing shortages, the overuse of solitary confinement and lockdowns, the inadequate implementation of congressional authorities to reduce prison populations and reduce recidivism. Due to this series of misfortunes and failures, I called for the Attorney General to replace your predecessor with a reform-minded director who was not a product of any Bureau bureaucracy. I know that one person alone cannot fix all of the problems the Bureau faces, but my hope is that under your leadership, Director Peters, BOP will chart a new course. There are more than 140,000 adults in the Bureau's custody and nearly 35,000 employees, many of whom share my desire for change. We will hear from some of these BOP stakeholders during our second panel. These witnesses can speak firsthand of the need for better oversight, investment, and accountability across the Bureau. Since this July alone, the Justice Department's Office of Inspector General has issued more than 15 press releases announcing the arrest, indictment, or conviction of BOP employees. An Associated Press investigation last November revealed that 2/3 of criminal cases against Justice Department personnel in recent years have involved the Bureau of Prisons. These cases involve smuggled contraband, rampant sexual abuse of people in custody and staff, and other crimes of violence. Without objection, I'm entering into the record the Internal Affairs report that BOP provided in response to a bipartisan oversight that Ranking Member Grassley and I are conducting. These documents show unacceptable levels of sexual misconduct by BOP staff, which Senator Grassley and I continue to investigate. For years, the Bureau has been plagued by chronic understaffing. These shortages have strained employee ability to carry out their jobs, to be safe, and they are difficult under the best of circumstances. To compensate for staff shortages, the Bureau has come to rely on augmentation, a practice that forces non-custodial staff like teachers and nurses to actually work as correctional officers. Augmentation deprives incarcerated individuals of the programming that helps them reintegrate into their communities. It also creates an unsafe environment that endangers BOP staff. In recent years, members of both sides of this committee, including myself, Ranking Member Grassley, Senator Booker, Senator Lee, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Cornyn, and others, have come together to enact bipartisan legislation aimed at responsibly reducing the federal prison population. Unfortunately, BOP's implementation of this reform leaves much to be desired. More than 3 years after President Trump signed into law the landmark First Step Act, many incarcerated people who have participated in recidivism reduction are still waiting for the earned time credits they were promised as a result of their work. And BOP continues to resist petitions for compassionate release from eligible individuals for age, medical, or other compelling reasons. When BOP does use authorities Congress has authorized, the experience has been positive. Consider this. Between March 2020 and July 2022, the Bureau of Prisons released 11,043 people to home confinement under the CARES Act. Only 17 have been returned to prison for new criminal conduct. 17 out of 11,000. It is clear many of the people languishing in federal prison have paid their debt and do not need to be there. They should be developing vocational skills, receiving mental health counseling and educational services, and re-entering society as productive members of our communities. Our federal prison system, in many critical respects, has failed to fulfill its fundamental purpose, to provide safe, humane conditions of confinement and ensure the positive return of incarcerated individuals to the community. I would just say parenthetically, I've served for some time in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate. If I could write the rules for members of Congress, I would require them in every 2-year period to take a foreign trip, which many do not. It's the only way to come to understand this world that we live in. And secondly, to visit a prison every 2 years. See what we're talking about when we talk about law and order, criminal sentencing, and incarceration, and see it firsthand. I'm hoping with your leadership we can finally chart a new course at the Bureau of Prisons. Now I turn to Ranking Member Grassley.
Director Peters, congratulations on your appointment. I look forward to hearing what you have to say and answering our questions and the witnesses on the second panel. I'd like to emphasize that this hearing gives us a chance to ask questions of Director Peters under oath, but I think it makes a lot of sense if this committee had the chance to do so before she became director. So I've co-sponsored the Federal Prisons Accountability Act. This is a bipartisan bill sponsored by Leader McConnell and co-sponsored by several others, including Senators Lee and Ossoff, and it would make the position of Director of Bureau of Prisons Senate confirmed. The Bureau of Prisons has been the subject of serious criticism, inefficiency, mismanagement, staffing problems, abuse of prisoners, crimes by prisoners, failure to implement prison programming, and you can go on and on with that list. A confirmation hearing is an opportunity for more accountability. The committee last held an oversight hearing on this Bureau, April 2021, with former Director Carvajal. He told us at that time that the Bureau was on track to meet the obligations under the First Step Act and to resolve staffing shortages. But we were misled because these remain areas of serious concern and are going to come up in this hearing as well. Staffing at federal prisons is a crisis. Without enough staff, you can't have the security to stop criminal activity inside prisons. Without enough staff, you can't implement the First Step Act programming to rehabilitate those who want to reform themselves. Without enough staff, you can't keep inmates and staff safe. Also want to mention that this committee has become aware of what appears to be disturbing examples of mismanagement and corruption. Director Peters, on August 1st of this year, I sent a letter to you on those issues that you've yet to respond to. I know that you only took the position on August the 2nd, but I'd still like to see a response to that as soon as possible. The letter is about whether commissaries create a conflict of interest for the Board of Prisons, Bureau of Prisons efforts to ensure inmates are satisfying their financial obligations. Many inmates have outstanding obligations such as victim restitution and child support. Inmates such as the Boston Bomber and Larry Nassar have thousands of dollars to spend on cigarettes and candy that's stashed at the Bureau of Prisons. While the Bureau of Prisons sits on that money, these notorious criminals aren't paying victim restitution and other obligations. In other words, now, the Bureau of Prisons profits from these criminals hiding their money in prison accounts instead of paying their victims. Action has been promised with respect to reforming how these accounts are monitored. However, we've seen little follow-through on that point. This committee has also been concerned about instances of prison workers and correction officers committing crimes. Director Peters, I understand that you recently visited the Federal Correction Institution Dublin, where several staff, including a chaplain and former warden, have been arrested for sexually abusing inmates. In response to letters from this committee, the Bureau of Prisons has supplied information on policies for hiring and enforcing rules on employee misconduct. However, these policies and rules don't matter if they aren't enforced within the culture that discourages breaking the rules. Leadership begins at the top. As I tell all government employees in leadership positions, either you run the agency or the agency runs you. In conclusion, I want to mention something that I think you figured I'd say. I've always placed a high importance on whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are very patriotic citizens that put the country above their own self-interest. In other words, they just want the government to do what the law says the government should do and spend the money accordingly. Whistleblowers help keep government honest. It's been widely reported that inmates who complain face punishment, but reports also indicate that whistleblower employees at the Bureau face retaliation for their speaking up. This is not how you build accountability or trust. It's important that as director, you understand that whistleblowers are protected by law and their efforts should be supported and not in any way chilled. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. After your 5-minute opening statement, there'll be a round of questions, 5 minutes from each member of the Senate. We welcome Colette Peters, the 12th Director of the Bureau of Prisons. She was sworn in by Attorney General Garland on August the 2nd of this year, previously served as Director of the Oregon Department of Corrections. As customary, I ask you to please rise and take the oath. You affirm the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. Let the record reflect that the Director answered in the affirmative, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee. I am honored to serve as the 12th Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons and thrilled to join this team of more than 35,000 corrections professionals who support the agency's critical law enforcement mission. I come to this work optimistic. We know so much more now about what works in corrections than we did 10 years ago when I became the Director of the Oregon Department of Corrections, and certainly 30 years ago when I began my career in your good state, Senator Grassley. We have always known that running safe and secure prisons is the foundation of our work. And now we know that treating those in our care and custody with the principles of normalcy and humanity improves working conditions for our employees and improves public safety. That type of environment better prepares us to achieve both parts of our mission, including the second part, to ensure people reenter society as productive citizens. Our job is to make good neighbors, not good inmates. And this is a historic time to be a part of corrections. When I began my career 30 years ago, it was a forgotten part of the public safety system, as evidenced by this hearing today and other actions taken by Congress and the public's expectations around conditions of confinement and good public safety outcomes. That is no longer the case. We are no longer forgotten. I am committed to ensuring that Bureau employees remain guided by our core values of respect, integrity, courage, and correctional excellence. Research and my own personal experience tells me we can be more assured of this expectation if we are focused on our correctional employees' wellness. They are mission critical and they are our everything. So wellness of our employees will continue to be a top priority of mine, as it has been for over the last decade. The data regarding the wear and tear of our corrections professionals was startling before the pandemic, and the pandemic presented a whole new host of challenges, including overtime and augmentation. I have visited 3 institutions since my swearing in as director, and I saw what I anticipated seeing: eager, hardworking corrections professionals who are exhausted. If ever there was a time to understand and address employee wellness at the Bureau, that time is now. But I can't even begin a legitimate conversation around wellness until we first tackle the issue of staffing. Thank you to Congress for the position, authority, and funding to improve those working conditions. Unfortunately, the change in the economy and the difficulty of hiring across this country, especially in law enforcement, has made that ever more difficult. So we are working diligently to improve our staffing numbers through career fairs, improved marketing and recruitment strategies, and recruitment and retention bonuses, just to name a few. Enhanced training also needs to be at the top of our priority list. A 2011 Bureau of Justice Statistics report noted that the average training of a new law enforcement officer in this country is 21 weeks. Currently, our Bureau employees get substantially less than that as they start their career with us. So if we are going to expect our corrections professionals to perform at a higher level, we must equip them with the appropriate training to meet those expectations. We also need to hire the right people. We must identify those who show a propensity to succeed in our correctional environments. We also know that we must continue and continuously improve conditions of confinement, all the while developing a culture where those who are in our custody feel comfortable coming forward without fear of retaliation. And moreover, that employees feel safe coming forward, and not only feel safe, but understand their obligation to come forward when misconduct occurs. And to do that, we are assessing culture, providing additional training, including gender-responsive training, trauma-informed training, and de-escalation training. We've also recently approved organizational structural changes that we believe will help us improve the communication flow throughout the agency and all the way up to the director, and better handle misconduct investigations and address our investigation backlog. As I said at my investiture, and I will repeat today, I believe in good government. I believe in transparency. And I know we can't do this work alone. We must come to this work with our arms wide open. I welcome accountability and oversight, and to that point, I welcome this hearing. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee, today, I am honored to speak on behalf of the Bureau and our employees across the country. And with that, this concludes my opening statement.
Thank you very much, Director. This is an issue of great interest to me, and I have more questions than I have time, so I'll try to highlight several of my thoughts. And I'm glad you said at the outset what you said when you were sworn in, that your job was to not make good inmates, but to make good neighbors. Because the fact is, the majority of those serving time in our Bureau of Prisons are likely to be released someday, and we don't want them to create more crime or more victims in the process. So let me ask you about a few of the highlights that have come up in hearings in the past, and I'd like to have your thoughts. Solitary confinement is solitary confinement is essential for safety and security in many circumstances, but it can also be abused and can cause mental damage to the inmate who is separated from contact with other persons for long periods of time. What is your feeling on the issue? You need to turn the microphone on, and if you draw it a little closer to you, it might be more.
Thank you. My team warned me that I needed to get used to doing that. Sorry, Mr. Chair. So the Bureau's goal, of course, is to house individuals in the least restrictive environment possible to ensure their own safety and the safety of staff and other inmates and the public. But your points are very true. Research has shown again and again and again that any type of restrictive housing can be damaging to an individual, especially those who have mental health issues. So this is a priority for me. This was a priority for me as director of the Oregon Department of Corrections. This is something we had been focused on for over a decade. We were able to, in Oregon, reduce our use of restrictive housing by 46%. So this is a complex issue. This is one I'm still getting up to speed on at the Bureau, but our values match in this topic area, Senator.
This morning, yesterday, the Department of Justice announced they were going to seek stiffer sentences in prisoner abuse cases. We have, unfortunately, with Inspector General reports, ample evidence that many prison workers have been arrested, charged, or convicted of crimes including sexual abuse, murder, and introducing contraband into prisons. Tell us how you'll deal with that aspect and whether it reflects other problems such as understaffing.
Thank you, Senator. Of course, we take allegations of staff misconduct very seriously. We have a zero tolerance policy for sexual abuse of any kind. This is also something I've worked on quite substantially in my career, both when I was new to the Department of Corrections in Oregon. We were one of 2 states who had yet to make sexual misconduct in an institution a felony. As the Inspector General, I took this very seriously, ensuring that people who did engage in this type of behavior were held accountable to the greatest extent of the law. That clearly will be my philosophy here as well, Senator. We are actively participating in a work group right now assembled by the Deputy Attorney General. You referred to the request that the Deputy Attorney General and I had when we met with U.S. attorneys just a few weeks ago to please take these situations and these cases seriously, both to send a clear message to the employees that this type of behavior is unacceptable and criminal, but also to send a message to the corrections employees who come to work every day doing good work that we will fetter out this type of behavior and they will actually be safer in their institutions.
Director, I think one of the most memorable hearings we've had in this Judiciary Committee involved the Olympic gymnasts who were exploited and abused by a man who was a medical doctor named Larry Nassar. There is no sympathy for him after hearing their testimony. Last year, the Washington Post reported that Larry Nassar held over $12,800 in his prison trust account, despite owing $60,000 in restitution payments to his victims. Question Senator Grassley raised just a few minutes ago, I join him. We just learned as well last month that R. Kelly, recently convicted of even more crimes, held over $28,000 in his inmate account while owing thousands of dollars in restitution to victims. What's wrong with this system? Why are we letting these people sit on sums of money or receive money from the federal government when they're not paying their fines and they're not paying restitution?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the director of the Bureau of Prisons and as a former victims advocate, this issue is really important to me. We had an embarrassing low collection rate in Oregon as well, and subsequently worked with the Oregon legislature to pass legislation that increased that accountability and increased those payments while securing a reentry fund for those in our custody. So I was quite pleased when I arrived at the Bureau that the Bureau had diligently been working in concert with the Department of Justice toward changing the rules in the Inmate Financial Responsibility Program policy, which would allow collection of a set percentage of all incoming funds from participating inmates. So the BOP has been working in tandem with the U.S. Attorney's Office and other government agencies in efforts to increase those restitution collection amounts, and a proposed regulation is currently under review right now with the Department of Justice.
My time is up, but if you believe that we need to change the law so that you can effectively achieve what you've just described, let us know that. I think there's strong bipartisan sentiment that this is an outrage, that Dr. Nassar would have $12,000 in an account and still have fines outstanding that he hadn't paid, or that R. Kelly had $28,000 and still hadn't paid restitution to victims. That we would be complicit in that kind of conduct is just absolutely unacceptable.
Thank
Senator
you, Mr.
Grassley?
Chair.
Yeah. You might expect that what you heard me say about whistleblowers, that would be my first question. It's even more important that I ask you this, as well as I ask everybody that comes before this committee. But recently, the Attorney General sent a letter to all employees that they're prohibited, and if they want to talk to Congress, they need to go through the Department of Justice Office of Legislative Affairs. That's going to have a chilling effect. So I was hard to read that you told the Associated Press that you want, quote, create an environment where people can feel comfortable coming forward and talking about misconduct. While their efforts should be respected and encouraged, they're frequently retaliated against and ostracized. I often say that whistleblowers are treated like a skunk at a picnic. So as director, Do you support the rights of whistleblowers within the Bureau of Prisons to communicate with and provide information to Congress and to do so free of retaliation? If so, tell me how you're going to make it clear to the Bureau of Prison employees that they can do that.
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley. Of course, I support people coming forward. As I said in my remarks this morning, we have to create an environment where people feel comfortable coming forward, both the adults in our custody and our employees, and not only feel comfortable coming forward as employees, but truly understand their obligation to come forward. So that is certainly something that I support. We have to create a culture to do that. As I visited one of the 3 institutions I visited was Dublin in California, and you've read the news reports of people not feeling comfortable coming forward, both the women in our care and also our employees. So we are working diligently to do cultural assessments in our institutions, starting with our female institutions, and provide training to our employees to ensure that they understand gender responsiveness, trauma-informed care, and understand that under my watch, under the watch of the executive team, that retaliation both to our employees or those in our custody will not be tolerated.
Attorney General Garland responded to questions from this committee, quote, "The Bureau of Prisons advises that it recognizes all verifiable child support judgments," end of quote. A resolution from the National Child Support Enforcement Association reads, quote, "Many federal inmates earn income from prison employment that could be withheld for payment of child support. However, the Bureau of Prisons has taken the position that current law doesn't allow them to do so," end of quote. Please describe how the Bureau of Prisons handle child support judgments. Specifically, does the Bureau of Prisons allow prisoners with the ability to pay based on their accounts at the prison to deny complying with child support judgments?
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley. In addition to the restitution collection that we talked about earlier, many inmates participate in the Bureau's Inmate Financial Responsibility Program. This is a program that benefits victims of crime, but also promotes financial responsibility for all court-ordered payments. The IFRP ensures that sentenced inmates develop a financial plan for meeting court-ordered and other legitimate financial obligations, including, in many cases, payment to victims or children through child support. So our employees are assisting those in our custody in developing that financial plan for meeting their obligations, both at initial classification and then at subsequent program review meetings. You are correct, Senator, that the department doesn't have the authority to withdraw those funds. That has to come through a court order, and we do work with the U.S. Attorney's Office to make that happen. Like I said earlier, we are working on a rule to modernize the Inmate Financial Responsibility Program, and we expect that that proposed rule will be released in the coming months, which, among other things, we hope standardizes and increases the amounts of money that will be used to pay down restitution, child support, and other debts.
Director Peters, misconduct in the federal prisons has been a significant problem. We've all seen stories of sexual abuse, contraband, drug dealing, violence, and more. Part of the problem is that each facility appears to be an island unto itself without much accountability up the chain of command. We saw at the Federal Correction Institution in Dublin, California, for example, how even the warden was accused of being involved in sexual abuse and lying. We need to know how that kind of thing could happen. So I've got several questions, but I can only ask you one now. What mechanisms do you have in place to ensure that you get accurate and reliable information about poor condition, misconduct, and criminality at federal prisons?
Thank you, Senator. Again, we take allegations of sexual misconduct very seriously. Having just visited the Dublin facility in California, I do have great confidence in the new warden there and her leadership as she rebuilds that executive team and rebuilds that team throughout the institution. That being said, we have already put some things in place to improve that communication flow that you're referring to, up to and including the director. It started with clear expectations of my executive team that there will be no surprises. We have to know, I have to know, headquarters needs to know when there are things that are not working, when there are allegations of misconduct, we have to be informed. We also have just recently gotten approved a new organizational restructure that actually is going to allow what I believe more accountability and our ability from headquarters to better hold folks accountable and be more informed. In addition, we are reorganizing our Office of Internal Affairs. Those individuals responsible for conducting investigations in the field traditionally reported up to the warden. We're changing that so that they are reporting up to central office, to headquarters. Furthermore, we just approved 40 additional positions in the Office of Internal Affairs, both on the investigation side and on the employee labor side, to hopefully get rid of the backlog of cases that we have right now, make them more streamlined, make them more efficient, and hold people accountable in a more swift and sure fashion.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It just so happens that I've had a lot of experience sitting on term setting and paroling authorities in the state of California. So I know our prison system, which is huge, rather well. And recently, 5 BOP employees who worked at FCI Dublin, including the former warden of the facility, were arrested on charges of sexually abusing women who were incarcerated in that facility. And Senator Grassley just spoke about that. Now, this is not an isolated incident. There are regular reports of sexual abuse and harassment of people who are housed in BOP facilities. According to an investigation by the Associated Press in 2020, there were 422 complaints that BOP staff had sexually abused inmates across BOP's system of 122 prisons. Of those claims, 290 are still being investigated. I just want to say that this is unacceptable, and more must be done to ensure this abuse does not continue. So I would like to know, what is BOP doing to address the rampant sexual misconduct taking place in some federal prison facilities?
Thank you, Senator. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to make your acquaintance, and we couldn't agree more. That behavior is egregious. It shall not be tolerated. When you are in our care and custody, you have every right to feel safe and to be safe. And so I take this very seriously. As the former Inspector General of Oregon, I work to help prosecute many of these cases. I will absolutely continue with that philosophy. The Bureau will continue to work with law enforcement to ensure that those individuals get prosecuted. We've done numerous things. As I said, Senator, I visited Dublin personally within my first month on the job. I spent the entire day talking to those in our care and custody and also talking to our employees. And what we have done, even specifically at that institution and at some of our other institutions, is we're beginning with a cultural assessment. What is happening inside the institutions where people didn't feel comfortable coming forward?
Well, maybe I ought to get a response in writing. I'm very serious about this. I've spent a lot of my career in prisons, state prisons in California, trying to straighten out problems. And so let me go on. There are widespread reports detailing BOP's inadequate response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the start of the pandemic, at least 48,000 959 inmates and 14,054 BOP staff have tested positive for COVID-19, and 308 inmates and 7 BOP staff have died from the virus. People in prison are approximately 3 times more likely to die of COVID-19 than the general population. So, last year, the Government Accountability Office conducted a study of BOP's response to the pandemic and issued 3 recommendations: that BOP evaluate the communication of COVID-19 guidance, that you capture and share best practices and lessons learned, and that BOP develop an approach to ensure facilities apply those practices. So I would like to know what steps BOP has taken to implement the GAO's recommendations, and what more can be done to improve the BOP's pandemic response.
Thank you, Senator. This has certainly been an area that I have been interested in, especially as we are looking at the potential of being exposed to monkeypox, making sure that we've learned lessons from COVID as we deal with potentially a new pandemic. So the Bureau has administered over 329,000 doses of COVID vaccines to more than 162,000 individuals. The Bureau offers the vaccine to all newly incarcerated individuals and those who previously refused the vaccine. I know that there are communication measures out there and education out there to ensure that they understand prevention protocols and access to this vaccine. I'm pleased to report that as of earlier this month, almost 66% of those in our custody are fully vaccinated, and 80% of our employees had been fully vaccinated. So I know that the pandemic is still at hand, and we're taking these measures very seriously, including maintaining the CDC criteria implementation at the Bureau.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Next is Senator Cotton.
Welcome, Ms. Peters. I have to say I find myself a bit mystified by the comments that Senator Durbin made earlier. He talked about seeking stiffer penalties for prisoner abuse cases. Of course, no prisoner should be abused, and if a prison guard is found guilty of doing so after being afforded due process of law, I'd favor them facing stiff penalties. One of the main reasons we impose stiff penalties, of course, is because it has a deterrent effect. And Senator Durbin and many of the other Democrats in this committee, like Senator Booker, seem to have a very selective view of when deterrence comes into play. Just yesterday, in fact, Senator Durbin blocked bills on the floor that would impose stiffer penalties for fentanyl, which is poisoning children all across America. Bills that I offered, bills that Senator Grassley offered. Senator Booker has repeatedly offered or blocked my legislation that would permanently schedule fentanyl under the Controlled Substance Act. So our Democratic friends seem to have a very curious and selective view of when stiff penalties will have an actual deterrent effect. Now, let me move on, Ms. Peters. This is your first appearance before the committee since this is not a Senate-confirmed position. So I'd like to ask you a couple basic questions that nominees for the committee always get asked. I assume you would agree that it's important for you and executive branch officials to be responsive to requests from Congress for information?
Yes, sir.
And I would assume that you also agree that it's important for you and executive branch officials to be responsive to requests from the public if information is requested properly under the Freedom of Information Act. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, the reason I ask is that because at the beginning of the pandemic, Congress passed the CARES Act, the first major coronavirus response bill, which gave temporary authority to the Bureau of Prisons to allow some inmates to serve out part of their sentences at home until the pandemic ended, or until the availability of vaccines meant that prisoners could again be housed in a secure location. But jailbreak activists, to include so-called progressive criminal justice reformers, asked the Biden administration to twist the law and have the Bureau use the pandemic as an excuse to release as many inmates as possible and never return them to prison and to finish their sentences after the pandemic ended. I know that this was before you started, but it was publicly reported that those jailbreak activists asked the Department of Justice to rewrite the law to achieve their soft-on-crime goals. Now, the department is proposing a new rule that would give the Bureau of Prisons authority to release tens of thousands of additional criminals and not require them to serve their sentences. This would not only be an enormous mistake in the middle of a crime wave, it would also be illegal. In January, I sent Attorney General Merrick Garland a letter to provide the exact same information that he would be required by law to provide any interested member of the public. That is, written copies of communications and meeting records between the Biden administration and these jailbreak activists where they discuss policy. This week, more than 8 months later, one of the Attorney General's underlings finally sent a cursory response providing exactly none of that information. I say this simply as a cautionary tale. I hope that you will be more responsive than the Attorney General, who has politicized the department, who seems unable to stand up to far left-wing activists in his own department and to enforce the law neutrally, at the same time that he sicks the feds on parents at school boards or send armed agents into a Catholic minister's home, a man named Matt Hoke, when he had agreed already to cooperate with any investigation into his supposed crimes. Now, the Attorney General is going to have a reckoning whenever he faces a Republican Congress in January. I hope, though, that you will simply cooperate with timely requests for information from members of Congress and from the public. Now, Ms. Peters, on a related point, I want to note that the President said just a couple weeks ago, the pandemic is over. Is President Biden wrong?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the cautionary tale about being responsive. We certainly want to be as responsive as we can at the Bureau of Prisons to both members of Congress requests and also that of the general public. As we pivot out of the pandemic and really focus on kind of a future state as it relates to the pandemic, we do have that rule under review that will give the Bureau guidance on those individuals that were released on home care confinement. We're hoping to see what that rule looks like here in the coming weeks, and I look forward to reviewing it when it's finalized.
So, Ms. Peters, is the President wrong? Is the pandemic over or not over?
Senator, I am not a health professional. I would not be able to make that determination.
But it's part of your job as the director of the bureaus to ensure that our prisons can adapt to pandemic conditions. Do you know how many criminals are currently serving their sentence at home who should be in the prison?
I don't have that number in front of me, Senator.
It's over 11,000. That includes 647 gun criminals, bomb makers, and other weapons criminals. 13 murderers. 5,870 drug traffickers. Are you certain that not a single one of those criminals who are serving their sentence at home are currently engaged in criminal activity?
Thank you, Senator. I could never make that certain determination.
I don't think anyone could. In fact, I'm pretty certain that at least one of them is, probably a lot of them. Thanks, Ms. Peters.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, my friend Tom Cotton mentioned my name. May I make a small response?
Oh, yeah.
Without objection.
So first of all, I don't object to scheduling. Fentanyl has been scheduled for, it is scheduled. You're talking about fentanyl analogs, and we should be specific about that. The scientific community has said we should test things before we schedule them, but you've actually won for the last 4 years. Fentanyl analogs have been temporarily scheduled. So what you're saying is not true. And the second thing that I want to say is 4 years of doing what you want to do, which is permanently scheduling, 4 years of scheduling fentanyl, has actually not seen the response that we want. We are in this nation seeing this overwhelming fentanyl crisis. And Mr. Chairman, we're trying to just do the same things we've been doing that caused mass incarceration in the first place, but didn't actually make us safer, as we've seen with the problem with fentanyl. So I'm happy to work on a real solution. Right now, again, for the record, fentanyl is scheduled. Fentanyl analogs are scheduled, and the crisis is getting worse. So we know there are a lot of things we could be doing to solve this problem, but having people beat their chest to try to create more and higher mandatory minimums or more and more scheduling when things are already done, that's just posturing. What we need to do is solve this crisis in America and come together in a bipartisan way to make this nation safer, and not to rhetoric that's just not true when this nation already has fentanyl scheduling, fentanyl analogs are scheduled, but the problem is getting worse?
It's not just a permanent scheduling. Yesterday, Senator Durbin blocked Senator Grassley's mere 14-month scheduling. The simple fact of the matter is, Democrats will not take this seriously unless they get something in return, like more violent felons released from prison. So I'm happy to have this debate on the floor later today. I have a stack of letters right here from parents whose children were killed by fentanyl sent to Senator Booker, and I'm more than happy to go to the floor and read those into the record if we want to.
Again, I'm sorry, but that's just not true. This partisan rhetoric, this partisan warfare, that we all don't have people in all of our states who are dying from this crisis. And so what he's asking for is already done. We have fentanyl scheduled right now, but more and more people are dying. Why can't we come together? Because there are a lot of Republican groups that I work with, a lot of Republican think tanks that I work with, that have real solutions to this crisis of people dying. I would never accuse my colleague, Tom Cotton, of not caring about dead children. We both have hearts. I know your heart. So to accuse me of that is outrageous. I literally run a city where people are dying from these drugs, and all I hear often is the same things we've been doing for 25 years or on the drug war that just are increasing incarceration, not helping. We're going to hear from people here who are addicted. Let's find real solutions and stop accusing ourselves in partisan warfare of things that just aren't true. Right now, fentanyl is scheduled. We've been extending that scheduling over and over again, but this problem is going worse. I'd love to work with my colleagues on things that are actually going to solve the problem, and not just the rhetoric that works good for partisan left-right debates, but doesn't work for actually saving the lives that we need to save. I'm tired of this ridiculous partisanship. Let's solve problems and not stop accusing each other of not having hearts. You're a good man, I'm a good man. Let's see if we can come together and actually solve some problems.
I didn't accuse you of anything in your heart. I said the obvious and predictable consequences of the policies you and your party support are the fact that we are now at, not mass incarceration, but a 21-year low in the number of inmates in federal prisons. We are not at a 21-year low in the number of overdoses in this country. We are at record highs. Almost twice as many people die every single year as from drug overdoses as died in the Vietnam War.
And just look at Right on Crime. Look at the organization called Right on Crime. I'm sorry, this is the last thing I'll say. You're creating not a real correlation. You know this. Just years ago, we were seeing drops in these things, which didn't necessarily correlate. In fact, southern states, red states, that were lowering their prison rates also saw a concomitant lower in crime. Your science is reckless. And if you really want to have a substantive conversation and dialogue on this, I'm open to doing it anytime. I'll come to your office. Heck, I'll fly to your state. Let's figure out how to solve this problem. And I'll use the data that is collected by right-wing organizations that point to things that work and things that are posturing.
We're going to return to the regular order. I'm not going to respond to the senator from Arkansas's personal reference to me. At this point, Senator Klobuchar is recognized.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Director, and thank you for the wisdom of going to College of St. Benedict and getting your degree there in St. Joseph, Minnesota. I want to start with one of the issues that my colleagues were discussing, and that is the work that has to be done on drug treatment. And as someone who was a prosecutor for 8 years and led an office with one of the groundbreaking drug courts, I'm well aware of these challenges and also how treatment works, including in the case of my own dad. I was an original co-sponsor of the First Step Act. I think my colleagues who worked on that, including Senator Durbin, Senator Booker, which provides federal prisoners incentives to participate in programming, including in drug treatment. According to an analysis by the Justice Department, during 2021, more than 43,000 people in BOP custody participated in a drug treatment program. What steps has the Bureau taken to increase the availability of drug treatment programs?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the reference to my alma mater. Minnesota has a special spot
Very
in
good.
my heart.
Thank you.
So the First Step Act implementation is something that's very important to me and the Bureau. I know that the FSA programs and services are available to all in custody. I can't speak specifically to if there's been any expansion in.
You want to get closer to the microphone?
I can't speak specifically if there's been any expansion of the alcohol and drug program since the implementation of FSA. I do know that there are 85 structured evidence-based programs and many productive activities that fall into the First Step Act and implementation. I know that we have an RDAP program, which is our Residential Alcohol and Drug Treatment Program, that begins on the inside and then continues into our residential programs. But as you are well aware, substance abuse is often one of the drivers of criminality, and so I'm proud that the Bureau has those treatment programs inside.
Very good. Today, I introduced a bipartisan bill with Senator Susan Collins to improve the treatment of pregnant women in custody. Karen Bass and Representative Guy Reschenthaler of Pennsylvania lead the bill in the House. It's bipartisan, obviously, in both chambers. Our bill ensures that women in federal custody receive access to the prenatal and postpartum care they need by requiring the BOP to develop policies to better house, transport, and provide access to care and nutrition. Do you agree that we should ensure that pregnant women in custody receive health care and nutrition commensurate with their needs?
Absolutely.
Okay, and will you commit to reviewing the bill?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. During the previous administration, along with others, I was very concerned about the apparent disparities in how the BOP determined eligibility for home confinement, particularly after we learned about Andrea Circlebear, a woman who had died in federal custody 4 weeks after giving birth while on a ventilator and having tested positive for COVID. Are you familiar with the case, and what steps has the Bureau of Prisons taken to prevent similar tragedies?
Thank you, Senator. I'm familiar with the case, it's not specifically in detail, but broadly, certainly. Again, we take the care and custody of those in our custody very seriously. CARES Act review, I know there have been concerns around the pattern risk assessment that has been utilized and maybe not being as gender responsive or responsive to minorities. I know that that has been under review by NIJ and is currently under review right now and looking at being revalidated.
All right, please look at the bill Senator Collins and I introduced, and I hope that'll be helpful. Another topic, I've heard from the constituents in my state about some of the workforce issues in Minnesota at our federal prisons. We have a very low unemployment rate in Minnesota. It's in the 1% range. And officers are working many overtime shifts, and non-officer employees, including cooks, teachers, and nurses, are being forced to fill in for correctional officers. We know this is a problem throughout our economy. One of the reasons overall I'd like to see, yes, training and apprenticeships programs, but also immigration reform. What steps are you taking to increase recruitment and employee retention rates, especially in more rural facilities?
Thank you, Senator. The staffing issues in our more rural facilities, of course, are more highlighted. We've been working really hard to improve recruitment and retention, both recruitment bonuses in the light of the current economy and retention bonuses. We've also consulted with an outside firm who just concluded their work and their recommendations around how we can better recruit, including how we market ourselves in order to get people inside. Plus, the issue around augmentation is one that's just incredibly important for me to touch on. It is something that is very useful during the short term, during a crisis, to be able to have those individuals ensure that those security posts are filled. But the wear and tear that's occurred organizationally and on individuals during the pandemic, it's just been too much.
Okay, I have another question that I'll just say for the record, Mr. Chairman, on mental health based on a bill that Senator Cornyn and I introduced. I also wanted to mention, I was talking about the First Step Act in my first question, and I note that our ranking member, Senator Grassley, was the lead Republican, so thank to him as well.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being with us. Recently, my staff was over at the Memphis facility that you all have, and what they heard from the team there is they're short on staffing, which seems to be a problem across the country. But also, there is a malfunctioning sewer system there. There is a substantial mold and mildew outbreak there. So I'd like to know what your approach is to cleaning up that facility, getting it fully staffed. Have you looked at this?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we've looked at this broadly as it relates to staffing across the country. I'm not familiar with the specific instances that you've mentioned at the Memphis facility, but from an infrastructure spot in the organization, we have infrastructure issues everywhere. In fact, the agency prioritized just the top life and safety issues, and it's a $2 billion deficit that
How
needs
do
to be
you
addressed.
plan to make this more specific to the facilities that are in question? Because this is of concern to those in Memphis, and it's of concern to me.
Thank you, Senator. It's also a concern of mine. When we look at these older facilities that now are at the very end of their lifetime replacement cycle, we have institutions across the country that are in dire
What
need.
is your specific plan for addressing these issues? How are you going to look at each one specifically? So if you're not prepared for that today, then submit that to me in writing so I'll know how to respond to the employees that are there at the Memphis facility.
What I can say, Senator, is that the Bureau has already prioritized those in life and safety categories as the most important ones to tackle first. Where Memphis falls on that prioritization, I don't know, but we can get that to you, Senator.
Perfect. That'll be great. Thank you for that. During his first week in office, President Biden did an executive order, and it's prohibiting the Attorney General from renewing DOJ contracts with private prisons. And that is very curious to me because it seems we don't have enough prisons, they're in bad shape, and I was interested to know if you expect that they're going to continue to devalue and decrease the use of private prisons, or do you plan to go back to using some of these facilities to relieve some of the pressure that is on the federal correctional facilities?
Thank you, Senator. We will continue to implement the President's executive order. We have 2 institutions that still have Bureau adults in custody in them.
So even though you cannot handle what you have now, you will not use private facilities. Is that what you're telling me?
Senator, I didn't say that. We have plans to absorb those adults in custody who are currently in those private prisons in our existing capacity.
But you've sat here today and told us that you don't have enough staff, you have facilities, you've got $2 billion worth of needs, so what you're saying doesn't make sense. Let me ask you this. How is it that the unions affect this use of private prisons? How does that play into your decision and the president's decision?
Senator, I'm not familiar with any involvement between those two, the union and this decision. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
You've never thought about it?
No, ma'am.
You haven't thought about it. I find that very interesting. Well, I think we're all very concerned about the condition in these facilities and how they've fallen into disrepair and the amount of attention that is being paid to these issues. And let me ask you this. You've talked about all these issues that need to be handled, but then I saw that you all had done a $1.5 million contract with a company for developing transgender programming. So what is the justification for spending that kind of money to develop programming when you have physical facility needs that are running up around $2 billion?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that contract. I do know that at the Bureau, we do prioritize individual case management based on risk and need, and that would include our transgender population, who everyone in our care is allowed community standard of care.
Well, you know, you continue to use everyone in your care, but yet the facilities do not accommodate a proper standard of care. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Hirona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director. Thank you for your commitment. We had a residential reentry center called Mahoney Holly for various reasons. It closed September 30th, 2019, and since then, we have been in touch with the Bureau to reestablish a reentry center. Can you give me an update on where we are? And I don't know why it's taking this long. Could you tell me why and what we can do to move things along? Because these reentry centers are very important. As the chairman noted most of the people who are incarcerated are released into the community, and you know that the work of these centers is to enable them to get back into the community. So could you give me an update on what's happening regarding Hawaii?
Thank you, Senator. You are absolutely spot on. Those residential reentry centers are something that really is special to the Bureau and allows us to improve reentry and make those good neighbors, like I said, specifically to the contract that we had on Honolulu. I do know that we've reissued the RFP multiple times, both for the residential facility. It's currently out for review again, as is the day reporting center. So I know that that's in the middle of the procurement process as well. When we've issued the RFP before, we didn't have anyone respond to the solicitation.
So what can we do if there's nobody? This is a facility that have been open for 30 years, and suddenly nobody responds to an RFP. What can we do in this situation?
Thank you, Senator. I don't have an answer for you today, but I do know that we have people at the Bureau as concerned as you are about providing that next step into reentry for Hawaii.
But if you don't have somebody responding to the RFP, then we are left with where we are. So it's that part that I would like us to address.
Thank you.
And if there's something that I can do, I'd like to work with you all to find somebody who can do this.
Thank you, Senator.
So I am alarmed by the reports of misconduct and sexual violence committed by BOT employees or contractors. And I note that you had said in your opening statement that it is really important for you to hire the right people. So before you hire people to be prison staff, do you have a way where you can ascertain whether these are people who might potentially engage in sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, or retaliation?
Thank you, Senator. We do have a screening tool that looks at finding those individuals who have a propensity to succeed inside a cultural corrections environment. It helps us get to those principles that you're speaking to, but it's not 100% effective, clearly, hence the situations and the cases that you've read about.
And you certainly wouldn't hire anybody who has some kind of a history of sexual harassment, abuse, or misconduct.
That's correct, Senator.
So getting back to the incidents of sexual violence, you do have people who are in your custody who become pregnant. In July, Senator Schatz and I led a letter to HHS, DOJ, and DHS requesting that justice-involved people receive full and proper consideration in the implementation of President Biden's executive order on protecting access to reproductive health care services. What support, if any, does the BOP offer to survivors of sexual violence who are in your custody?
Thank you, Senator. We have psychologists throughout the organization that would provide mental health care for the victims of those situations.
So has the Bureau taken any action to protect access to reproductive health care, including abortions?
Sorry, Senator, can you repeat the question?
What has the Bureau done to protect access to reproductive health care, including abortions, for those people in your custody who are pregnant as a result of rape?
Those individuals who are in our custody still have access to abortions when they request them. We do pay for those abortions in the instances of rape.
I'm glad to hear that. So, relating to Native youth in BOP juvenile justice systems, over the last decade, many reports in Hawaii pointed toward the over-representation of Native Hawaiian youth in our juvenile justice system. In 2011, a study found that while Native Hawaiian youth accounted for about 30% of Hawaii's youth population, they accounted for about 46% of detention home admissions. And at the time, Native Hawaiian girls accounted for about 52% of those detained. And this July, through the work with Kawailoa Youth and Family Wellness Center and many others involved, it's really been a whole of a person kind of a process. It was announced that Hawaii had no girls in juvenile detention. And we certainly have more work to do with regard to the overrepresentation of Native Hawaiian youth in the juvenile population. So, what work is the Bureau doing to ensure the federal juvenile justice system works to reduce its own populations, and how is it integrating restorative justice like what we are seeing in Hawaii?
Well, as the former director of the Oregon Youth Authority, you are speaking a lot of my philosophy that I'm familiar with, but as the director of the Bureau of Prisons, that wouldn't be under our purview.
Whose jurisdiction would that be under?
I don't know the answer to that, Senator.
Thank you, Senator
Thank
Rono.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I have 30 seconds?
Senator Grassley is recognized for 30 seconds.
Just to follow up on something that you said in your opening statement that I didn't know how complete it was. The Bureau of Prison Internal Affairs data that you placed in the record is part of what we possess. The Department of Justice has objected to making the rest public. I appreciate what you have done so far, putting on the record, but the other data should be in the record today, including data relating to inmate trust accounts, but apparently the Justice Department objected and wants to keep it hidden from the public. The public's business must be public, so I'm not asking for something today, but I'd like to work with you to continue our joint oversight work and make that information public.
You've got it. Senator Booker.
Thank you. I know you had a hard time hearing that.
I did, Senator.
Yeah, but I'm sure that his staff will communicate with yours. Hey, before I jump into my questioning, I was really grateful you came by my office, and I just found your own personal story so great. This is the first time you've been here in a Senate hearing. Could you just tough job with a lot of responsibility, a lot of pressure, inheriting, frankly, a lot of problems. What drives you to do this work? Why are you where you are?
Thank you, Senator. It was a pleasure meeting you in person. Good to see you again here this morning. It's the people in the business. I believe in people. I believe people can change. And so I'm passionate about really working hard to ensure that those in our care and custody come back to our communities as good neighbors. And I believe in our corrections professionals. I know we've spent a lot of time this morning talking about the people who made horrible, egregious choices. That is not the majority of our employees. The majority of our employees are good, hard-working professionals that come to work every day as ashamed and embarrassed as those egregious stories as you and I are. And so that really is what drives my work. It's been 30 years in public safety, and I still come to this work very optimistic, even with all of the challenges that I've inherited. I believe that we can be a beacon of hope in corrections.
And you have, and again, I just want you to get this in the record, your experience in Oregon, you had a lot of successes. You mentioned one data point already about driving down the use of what I would call solitary confinement. Could you just give us a few more things that you were extraordinarily successful on in your time in Oregon that you might be proud of?
Really proud of our restrictive housing reduction that you're referring to, but also our work on employee wellness. So when I first became director of the Oregon Department of Corrections, we had 6 employee suicides in an 18-month period. And as a former researcher, I looked to the research, and there wasn't much out there for corrections professionals. So we brought 2 universities in to really study the issue and then implement programmatic changes. I will tell you the reduction in restrictive housing and wellness circled together. When you create better environments inside our institutions, you also have healthier, more well-being employees.
Well, this in a bipartisan way, we've done some good things on police officer mental health and wellness, and I'm really hoping we can all work together to do something. Your correctional officers, I've met many of them. I've been visiting prisons since I was in law school, and I think Senator Durbin, what he said was more profoundly important than I think people maybe have heard about all of us should visit prisons regularly. And again, the men and women that work in these institutions are under high pressure, high stress, difficult jobs, and their well-being, their mental health is something I don't think we have a history of attending to well at all. So I'm hoping we can work on something like that. Just two areas I want to cover, which we've already talked about, but one of the proudest bills I wrote with some support of my friend, partnership with my friend Elizabeth Warren, was the Dignity Act for women. And I was very impressed. We wrote the legislation, and a lot of states implemented for women in incarceration. Then thanks to the leadership of Dick Durbin and Chuck Grassley, we got some Dignity Act parts of that bill into our First Step Act. The shackling of pregnant women and other practices that I think are abhorrent. But I still, when I've gone to talk to women, incarcerated women, I hear stories of sexual harassment, of not trauma-informed care, because about 80 to 90% of women who are incarcerated are survivors of sexual trauma. Just practices of people walking in. I think one of our coming witnesses wrote in her testimony about how male guards walking in on women when they're in their shower, often who've been survivors. And I know this is of great concern to you. We've already touched on it. But can you just say for the record how seriously you take this, and that perhaps a year from now we can have a conversation about some of the things you've done to address these issues of sexual harassment and inappropriate conduct?
Absolutely, Senator. I take this very seriously. I'm hoping that the additional positions we just approved in our Office of Internal Affairs, our partnership with the Inspector General, and the conversation that the Deputy Attorney General and I just had with all U.S. attorneys in asking them to take these prosecutions very seriously will also help improve the environments for everyone in our care, especially our women.
And then I'm going to submit questions to the record. I want to be respectful of the time, but and Senator Durbin already covered a little bit about this, but the issues of earned time that we put into the First Step Act, this is something that I'm hoping we can get done as quickly as possible. There's no more precious value in the United States we talk about in all of our founding documents, which is liberty and freedom, and to have pathways for people to get that precious value, it's really important. We've discussed it. I might have some more specific questions for you, but I just want to say I celebrate your presence here. I'm grateful for you taking on what is, I think, one of the most difficult jobs in all of federal government. There is a crisis that you in our American prisons, and I'm grateful that you are dedicated to supporting correctional officers, staff, as well as doing right by those American citizens who are incarcerated. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Want to just have a questions I want to get to, obviously, but Director Peters, want to just begin by expressing what I imagine you've heard from other members of the committee, other senators, about the reports we hear of abuse and exploitation in the Bureau of Prisons facilities across the country. I know in California, my office receives regular inquiries and concerns about living conditions, for example, year-long delays in receiving adequate health care, particularly troubling in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. So appreciate your commitment to ensuring humane, efficient, and appropriate conditions are restored in facilities around the country. I'm going to ask you about staffing here in a second, but on the point of facilities, give one example why it is of concern to me. Fresno County in California has, during the summer, average temperatures of 93 to 97 degrees. And periodic triple-digit temperatures and beyond are not uncommon. Yet we received reports from FCI Mendota, which is in Fresno County, that it lacks adequate air conditioning. You can imagine what that means for the folks housed there. Elsewhere in California and the country, we hear about squalid, unsafe conditions, falling concrete, freezing cold temperatures in the winter, broken cells and pipes. So with that being said, what plans do you have for improving overall conditions of BOP facilities?
Thank you, Senator. So I do know that we have more than a $2 billion deficit in our infrastructure replacements for all of the things that you just listed, our HVACs, our roofs, other structural issues, and we get appropriated about $95 million each budget cycle. So we are constantly prioritizing and reprioritizing which one of those issues needs to be addressed first. But I know that the Bureau has prioritized them in the life safety category, so we're managing those first and foremost out of the gate. But it's a significant issue at the Bureau. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I appreciate your recognition of that and look forward to working with you to address that. My next question has not to do with facilities, but as I mentioned a minute ago, with staffing, because staffing is critical for ensuring the basic conditions that we expect at these facilities. I've heard of the BOP practice involving the push of civilian employees into duties usually performed by correctional officers. Very different category, requiring very different training and preparation. So not only is it concerning, but nearly 1/3 of federal correctional officer jobs are vacant. So again, we have a recruitment and retention issue as well. But when staff members who serve as cooks, teachers, nurses are forced to serve now guarding detainees, that's an untenable situation. I raised this point at a hearing in July with the Homeland Security Committee, just to see what, number one, how prevalent is the practice? Number two, what's the plan for addressing it? And just to underscore the point, a few months ago, my office received reports out of FCI Dublin, where we heard that staffing had been so low that drug treatment programs had to be shut down. FCI Mendota, where detainee suicides are at high levels. So I can go on and on with examples. Mr. Carvajal could not tell me what efforts he had personally taken to overcome staffing shortages within the Bureau. And so now I ask you, can you detail any plans or prioritization you have to addressing these staffing shortages?
Thank you, Senator. It's at the top of my list. Like I said earlier, I cannot address the wellness of our employees if we first don't address the staffing issue, because it's resulting in overtime, and augmentation is the word that we use to describe those individuals, as you well know, those teachers, cooks, that list that you mentioned, that come and step into the post for correctional officers. Now, for the record, I think you'll be assured to know that those individuals do get trained as law enforcement officers. They receive that same training that correctional officers do. That being said, augmentation is only a good idea when used in the short term. The fact that it's been used for years now to manage through the pandemic and manage through the staffing crisis really has put a wear and tear on the whole system. When a psychologist has to pull a correctional officer post, her work is still stacking up at her desk, and that case management isn't happening. So we are working really hard to address staffing, both increasing our recruitment fairs, increasing our marketing, how we talk about ourselves. We just completed the work with a consulting firm that we had come inside to analyze what we're doing, and they're providing us with recommendations right now. And so we're working hard. I don't have all the recommendations in front of me today, Senator, but I assure you this is at the top of my list.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Sass.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Peters, welcome. Thank you for being here today and for the way you've managed this hearing. Thank you as well for the time you've given me in my office in the past about this. Can we stay on Senator Padilla's line for a minute? Could you just give us a level set on augmentation? How prevalent is the practice? How many people are doing it? What's the typical duration?
Thank you, Senator. I'm not prepared with those details today, but we could certainly provide that to you. I know that it is ongoing every day. And not only is the issue of overtime and augmentation an issue, then in order to solve that problem, we're actually moving people in between facilities to assist. So when I visited our institution in California, the Dublin facility, most of our health services staff that day when I was there were on reassignment from another facility. So we are really stretching our employees, and when you do things like that, you're not able to build that solid culture that you want to build. So happy to provide additional details, but this is an issue very important to me.
Thanks. Yes, please, to whatever materials you have, but also the contractors and consultants that you're hiring. We'd love to have sort of a shared database for the committee to understand. Qualitatively, then, give us a little bit more of an understanding when you say the psychologist who then, when she goes back to her desk, the work is piled up. Describe for the committee what that really looks like and what you think the implications are for morale of keeping people in jobs where they didn't sign up to be guards.
Absolutely, and I have had the opportunity to talk to individuals, boots on the ground, psychologists, in fact, who have been engaged in augmentation. And it's a mixed reaction. They're proud that they're law enforcement officers. They're proud that they are trained and ready to fill those posts. And as I said in my opening comments, they're exhausted. It is a lot. We've asked a lot of our people in the last 3 years. And so this is an issue that I'll continue to try and address. But on a daily basis, boots on the ground, if you will, Senator, it literally means that that psychologist is pulled out of her office onto a security post for up to and including the whole shift.
So, but over the course of a week, how many people are doing that 50% of the time? Like if you're going to work a 40-hour week, how many hours might you be doing a job other than the one that you signed up for?
Senator, I don't have those details today, but we certainly can get those for you.
But it's fair for us to understand that some people are doing it a majority of their time?
That is not my sense that it's a majority of the time, but it is my sense that it's on a regular basis.
Okay. Well, on staffing more broadly, obviously, I think there's a broad agreement that we have a staff shortage problem, and that includes qualitative, quantitative, morale, et cetera. And I agree that staffing up should be one of the BOP's main priorities and you as new director. But it feels like right now there's no reliable way to calculate how much staff BOP actually needs. So I want to quote to you from the Government Accountability Office finding last year, quote, multiple methods for assessing its staffing levels to determine shortfalls, but each method has inconsistencies in either terminology or methodology. I think we agree that there's a BOP staffing shortage, but I don't think we know very much about it. What's the most concrete thing you can tell us about the staffing shortage? What do we know to definitely be true given those GAO criticisms?
Thank you, Senator. Well, clearly you have a knowledge base. I think in the past what we did was a non-consistent way of establishing which staffing patterns that we needed at each of our institutions. Since each of our facility structures look very different, what we asked one of the consultants to do is actually study each one of our facilities and then come up with an automated staffing assessment so that we are going to be able to tell you with a great amount of certainty what staff we need at each localized facility, not just in the aggregate across the country for the Bureau.
When will we be able to see and know that?
I'm not sure exactly when they're going to complete their work, but I know that they're in their final stages. They just briefed our executive team 2 weeks.
Could we ask that within the next week or 10 days, you could tell the committee what the deadline will be for us to be able to understand the staffing issues? Is it 3 months out or 6 months out? But whatever the right answer is, can you tell us that in the next week or two?
Thank you, Senator. I can commit to telling you whatever estimate that we might have as it relates to the consultant's work, certainly.
And can you give us an overview of your recruitment plan? Where do you start and who are you competing against to get people into these important jobs?
Yeah, it's different at each one of our facilities. In some of our rural facilities, we're not competing with anyone. We're just having a tough time finding people in the community to even apply. In our locations where there is competition, we're competing with fast food industry and other individuals, organizations that are giving $5,000 signing bonuses. So we're working on recruitment bonuses, retention bonuses. 6 of our facilities now have direct hire authority. Those 6 that are the most difficult to staff right now. We're piloting in the Mid-Atlantic region a new way to recruit. We worked with a firm to help improve how we market ourselves, and so now we're piloting that product in the Mid-Atlantic region, and we hope to see good outcomes.
Thank you. I think that there are a lot of us here who'd like to help on these issues. I think we need more shared data. So just to underscore the point that I think we feel a sense of urgency on wanting to understand some quantitative issues to try to figure out how we can assist. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Sass. Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your continued leadership and oversight of the Bureau of Prisons. It's been a pleasure working with you, and proud of the legislation we've introduced together this week, which we'll touch on in a moment. Director Peters, congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you, Senator.
And appreciated your time yesterday when we met in my office. And as I said then, I want you to succeed in fixing what's broken at an agency where quite a bit has been broken. I want to begin noting that in July, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, or PSI, held a hearing as part of our months-long investigation into corruption, misconduct, and abuse at the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta. I'd like to ask you for your commitment to join me on a site visit at U.S. Penitentiary Atlanta later this year to inspect the facility, to meet with and hear directly from those who are incarcerated there, including pretrial detainees and the staff, and to brief the public on our conclusions thereafter. Can you make that commitment to me, please?
Senator, you and I spoke about this yesterday. I was already scheduled to visit USP Atlanta, and it would be an honor to tour that facility with you.
Excellent. I appreciate that. I want to follow up again on that same hearing and investigation that the PSI undertook and is continuing. Following then Director Carvajal's testimony in July, we submitted questions for the record to the Bureau of Prisons, and responses were due on September 15th. We've heard nothing from BOP or DOJ, nor have we received any request for an extension, and this is consistent with long-standing and consistent challenges that we've had securing the information that we need from the Bureau of Prisons and from the department as part of the ongoing oversight of the Bureau of Prisons. I want to emphasize, of course, my recognition that you're new in this post and you do not bear responsibility for those past failures to comply with congressional oversight. As I mentioned yesterday when we met in my office, my hope is that with the fresh leadership that you bring to the Bureau, that you can set a new tone of cooperation with Congress as we engage in good faith oversight of the Bureau of Prisons. And I recognize that the Department of Justice plays a role in determining how requests for information are conveyed to Congress. I'd like to ask for your commitment that you'll make every effort that you can to get me as soon as possible information about when we can expect answers to those questions and to expedite their production to the best of your ability.
I will, Senator.
Thank you, Director. I appreciate that. In addition to those questions for the record from the July hearing, to which we've not yet received a response, we have two outstanding letters from the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations to the Bureau of Prisons related to an ongoing investigation, one from April and one from August. And again, we've received no information from the Bureau of Prisons in response. So I'd like a similar commitment from you that, to the best of your ability and to the extent that it's within your power, you'll do everything you can to get me as specific and precise information you can about when we will receive responses to those requests and the production of relevant records. Can you make that commitment?
I can, Senator.
Thank you, Director Peters. Do you agree and would you welcome what I believe is needed, which is strong and independent oversight of BOP in light of the misconduct and deficiencies and failures that you acknowledged in your opening statement and which you've committed to address?
I do, Senator. I've had multiple conversations with the Inspector General himself and see him as a partner and someone who will help us pivot to the future.
I'm glad to hear that. And yesterday, with Chairman Durbin and our Republican colleague, Senator Brown, I introduced the Bipartisan Federal Prison Oversight Act, which will overhaul oversight of federal prisons, significantly strengthen DOJ's Inspector General to conduct that oversight, as well as establish a new independent ombudsman of the Department of Justice to handle and investigate complaints from either incarcerated people or staff. Should this bill pass, will you commit to working in good faith with the Congress, with the department's Inspector General, and with the Office of the Ombudsman to ensure its successful implementation and to provide timely those records requested by those entities?
Of course, Senator.
Thank you, Director. Held a hearing just recently in the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations focused on state and local prisons and jails and deaths in custody. And we focused on the efforts of the Department of Justice to collect death in custody data. This is well outside of your purview. That's a matter for the Office of Justice Programs. But I'd like to ask if you will publish for the public facility-by-facility death data within BOP facilities.
Senator, I can certainly consult our team of lawyers and see if that's a possibility.
I appreciate that, and if you wouldn't mind letting me know what you determine, I'd be grateful for that. Finally, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, just very briefly, Director, this was an issue that came up frequently in questioning of Director Carvajal. Senator Durbin questioned him repeatedly. I questioned him in PSI about who has ultimate responsibility for what happens at the BOP. And again, I'm wishing you the best. I want you to succeed, and I want to help you to succeed to fix what's broken. The buck will stop with you and does stop with you, correct?
That is correct, Senator.
You will bear personal and ultimate responsibility for what happens at the Bureau of Prisons, correct?
That is correct, Senator.
I want to encourage you to consider being personally briefed on the suicide reconstruction reports that are produced when inmates in BOP facilities commit suicide. Those are an invaluable resource for you to understand what's happening in your facilities. Will you make a commitment to be briefed on the findings of those suicide reconstruction reports at BOP facilities?
Senator, I've already read many of those reports, so I would continue that practice.
On an ongoing basis?
That is correct, Senator.
Thank you, Director Peters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Senator Whitehouse.
Welcome, Director.
Hi, Senator.
Thanks for being here. Senator Cornyn and I did the provisions in the First Step Act related to the safe and orderly return of folks in custody to the community, and I wanted to touch base with you about that program. The first thing is that my understanding is that it's working quite well in terms of outcomes. We have information that as of December 31st, 2021, the recidivism rate for those who went through the pre-release programming was about 16%, compared to an overall recidivism rate for BOP population of 43%. Does that seem about right to you? Do you think those statistics reflect the success of the program?
Senator, I don't have the recidivism statistics in front of me, but I do know that out of the 11,000 that have been released on the CARES Act, only 450 have been returned to prison, and only 17 of those were returned for committing a new crime.
So your characterization of that result would be?
Positive, Senator.
At the same time, it appears that the program is backlogged as employees who are participating in its implementation get pulled into traditional corrections duties. Is that the case also?
Senator, if that's the case, I have not been briefed on that backlog.
Okay. Well, I'll follow up to take a look at that because it seems like it's a missed opportunity and perhaps a mistaken priority if that is what is happening. Specifically, Rhode Island had extremely good luck, great outcomes by providing medication-assisted treatment to incarcerated individuals prior to their release. And among the results that we saw was a dramatic, like 60% reduction in overdose fatalities from a similar population beforehand. So that seems to work quite well. Could you let us know how that program is proceeding, both as to the screening for medication-assisted treatment and as to the implementation of medication-assisted treatment for folks being discharged from BOP custody?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, our medicated assistant treatment program was implemented in 2019 and has proven successful. All of the data points that you have just mentioned, I'm in complete agreement with. I do have some data. In the last 6 months, we have increased from about 461 MAT patients to 920. And so we continue to see that number grow. Over 3,000 individuals have been prescribed MAT medication since the program was implemented in 2019.
Great. While we worked very well together in bipartisan fashion, even getting President Trump excited about the bill and signing it into law with a big crowd in the Oval Office, there were some things that we could not get done, and I would like to ask you to consider supporting legislation that would allow this to happen. Not at this particular moment, obviously subject to review, but I used to travel around Rhode Island as U.S. Attorney and as our state's Attorney General in a state where the Attorney General has full criminal jurisdiction. We don't have DAs. I was Attorney General and DA. Pointing out on a graphic that I had the density of the population in different zip codes that had been recently released from incarceration. And there were zip codes in Rhode Island that had virtually 0 people in that category. And there were zip codes in Rhode Island that had an enormous population of people coming out of incarceration. And while we provide pre-release services, anti-recidivism services, MAT services, and things like that, that very much support the individual returning to the community, we've been less attentive to what supports the community's need that are the locales into which the very heavy population is drawn from recently incarcerated people. So I would love to work with you on that and try to figure out ways to, A, get support for those programs, and B, figure out how the Bureau of Prisons thinks that they would work most effectively for their population. Would you be willing to work on that? Do you think that's a good issue to address?
Absolutely, Senator.
To both?
To both, yes.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you very much, Director, for coming before the committee. Is this your first appearance before a congressional committee?
It is, sir.
A+. You did very well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I hope our performance at least is a passing grade. But
He's never given me an A+ for the record.
Thank you very much for being here. We
Thank you,
appreciate
Mr. Chair. It was a pleasure.
And we're going to have a second panel. Take a moment to set up the table. I'll swear him in. Good, that's great. So if the second panel would come up to the table, please. If you would remain standing for just a moment. Mr. Wetzel knows what's coming. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm or swear the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the three witnesses answered in the affirmative. And I want to have a brief introduction of our witnesses. Cecilia Cardenas is an accountant, president of CC and Associates, an accounting firm she founded earlier this year. Previously incarcerated in federal prison Camp Bryan in Texas and FPC Pekin in Illinois, which I visited. She served the final 2 years of her sentence on home confinement under the CARES Act. Shane Fawsey, is that correct, Shane? Is the President, Council of Prison Locals, the national union representing BOP employees. John Wetzel, Chief Executive Officer of Fronema Justice Strategies, and a former member of the First Step Act Independent Review Committee, previously served 3 terms as Pennsylvania Secretary of Corrections, a position which he was first appointed to by Republican Governor Tom Corbett. You've all been administered the oath, and I'm going to start with Ms. Cardenas. You have 5 minutes to make an opening statement. I might just add, we're on a roll call. Senator Booker is running off to do the roll call. It'll be a tag team when he returns, so it's no disrespect, but these things happen to us. Ms. Cardenas.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. My name is Cecilia Cardenas. I was born in Breckenridge, Texas, and grew up in Davenport, Iowa. Growing up, I had big dreams for the future, just like everyone else. I liked writing, fashion and design, and went to school for accounting. While in college, I had a boyfriend who sold drugs, and I made the terrible decision to sell drugs too. At the beginning, my boyfriend at the time was able to get ecstasy pills, and I would sell them to my friends. I wasn't addicted to drugs, but I soon became addicted to the money you could make by selling them. I was pretty naive about drugs, and that ignorance ended up causing me to be incarcerated for 7 years. At the time I was arrested, I moved on to selling other drugs, primarily cocaine, in both powder and crack forms. I was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and served most of my sentence in FPC Bryan and partly in FPC Pekin. Those of us in prison in early 2020 were scared when we learned about the COVID-19. We knew that we were at great risk of contracting COVID-19 in prison, as there is no way to be physically distant, and that corrections officers who came in and out of prisons from the community were likely to bring the disease in. Fortunately, I benefited from when Congress passed the CARES Act, which allowed people who were not convicted of violent crimes and were determined to be low risk to go to home confinement if we had served at least half of our sentences. I was sent to home confinement in May 2020 after serving a little more than 7 years. I wore an ankle monitor from the date of my release until I was ultimately released from the BOP on January 14, 2022. During that time, I got a job at Kraft Heinz and enrolled back in school at St. Ambrose University. No matter how much I attempted to convince myself that the monitor did not define me, I felt compelled to have to explain to everyone I came in contact with why I was wearing my monitor. While in prison, I tried to be productive, and it paid off for me after Congress passed the First Step Act. The First Step Act authorized some people in prison to earn time credits if we participated in programming designed to reduce our risk of reoffending. I knew I was not going to commit another crime, but I completed as much programming as I could. In January of this year, the Justice Department announced its plan for implementing the earned time credit provision. I learned that I would be able to redeem 365 days of my credit and move from home confinement to supervised release. This change allowed me to leave home confinement a month early. I was ecstatic. I was about to start school and didn't want to have to wear the ankle monitor. By the grace of God, I was able to avoid that. Most importantly, I could start my own business. I'm currently pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Finance at St. Ambrose University, and in February started CC and Associates Financial, providing accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll services to business owners. I'm grateful for the time that I was able to get back because of the CARES Act and the First Step Act. I recently saw an article that said 11,000 people were, like me, released to home confinement early under the CARES Act, and of those 11,000, only 17 had committed new crimes. I'm not surprised. Many of us are serving sentences that are longer than needed to hold us accountable for our mistakes. I am disappointed that the BOP has not used its authority under the CARES Act more to help others who qualify. I hope the new director will change that. I hope Congress will consider making the CARES Act home confinement placement authority permanent. I also hope the BOP will finally and fully implement the First Step Act and provide some benefit to those like me, people who aren't able to benefit for the full year of the earned time credit and apply that to the probation term. I'm glad this committee is holding the oversight hearing because the BOP needs more transparency and accountability. The culture in the institutions I served at was toxic and inappropriate. Correctional officers are free to do whatever they please, regardless of written policy, and many harass prisoners. I saw staff members gang up on prisoners and make their life hard simply because one officer had a personal issue with a prisoner. Prisoners would get harassed for exercising their rights, like requesting a transfer. If a prisoner would write up or complain to the administration about an officer, they would get retaliated against, thrown in solitary confinement, shipped from the compound altogether, or the write-up would simply get thrown out. When we witnessed misconduct, a prisoner co-worker reported it to the Inspector General, and nothing came of it. During my time in prison, male correctional officers would sexually harass women, myself included. Some would make unwanted advances on me, and one officer made a comment about my body and said I should expect to get attention because of my shape. If you were to report the officers, you would be shipped off to a transfer facility while there was a supposed investigation and then ultimately moved to another prison. Most of the time, nothing came of it. Male officers are allowed to go into women's bathrooms and shower area, leaving prisoners to feel vulnerable. I also saw how bad the medical care was. They simply didn't take care of people. Even when people complained of pain or more severe concerns, the medical staff would say just to drink water, walk on the track, go to commissary, and get over-the-counter medicine when it was your day to shop. One woman I knew was turned away only to suffer a heart attack. While I was in FPC Bryan, we didn't have any dental care for about 3 years. I believe that effective oversight could probably prevent a lot of problems I saw and experienced. Currently, inspections are announced in advance, and so problems are hidden, and prisoners are provided with some sort of reward, like bags of candy or things that are not usually offered in the prison for going along with the staff's narrative. I want to be clear that not all BOP staff is part of this toxic culture I've described. The issue is that the staff that genuinely want to help are held back or silenced by their coworkers and/or are shunned by them, ultimately making their job unbearable. Finally, Mr. Chairman, as someone who sold both crack and powder cocaine, I hope you all will pass the Equal Act before the end of the year. There is simply no reason to punish people differently for selling these different forms of the same drug. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Cardenas. Mr. Wetzel.
Good afternoon, or morning, afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. I got to tell you, I've never had less pressure at a hearing after serving over a decade running sixth largest corrections system in the country. Usually I'm on the hot seat like Director Peters was, and I really want to commend her for coming in here 2 months in, trying to absorb all this information and get through a hearing like this. Really want to commend her, and I'm excited that the Biden administration chose to go outside. In my current existence, I have a national corrections, criminal justice consulting firm, as well as an associated foundation, a nonprofit focused on providing opportunities for kids living in poverty to get out of poverty. And in that work, I spend a lot of time around the country. And let me just provide some context for this group. There's a national corrections staffing crisis. The crisis is profound. It started before COVID. COVID exacerbated it, and it's at a crisis level, and the response is slow to it. So much of what you hear, much of what you see, many of the issues that we've seen nationally in corrections over the last 2 years go back to staff. The reality is corrections staffing is supply and demand, and the supply is down and demand is up. There's not a context in the world that when supply is down and demand is up, you don't have problems. Problems in this context, unfortunately, result in the loss of life, and that's what's at stake. Oversight is an absolute no-brainer for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. To give some more context and history, as I was the young guy the first time I came down here under the Obama administration as part of the Colson Task Force, looking at Bureau of Prisons, and so for nearly a decade, been involved in providing advice, advisement to various attorneys general about Bureau of Prisons and working with Senator Durbin and many others around the First Step Act. And the consistent thing is that no one is satisfied with how the Bureau of Prisons operates. And in a very unique setting, the issue is not a partisan issue. As a matter of fact, it's apolitical. And it's actually acameral because I don't think any chamber is happy with how BOP is existing. Clearly, bringing a reformer like Colette Peters in, you're looking for a change. The reality is she doesn't have the tools or the levers to force change. Change in big bureaucracies, the arc of big bureaucracies go towards the status quo. I mean, you're sitting here asking for basic information, the augmentation, for instance, taking people who aren't supposed to be correctional officers, but the part that's missing in augmentation is doing other important, necessary things like nursing, like psychology, like programming, and taking them for their duties. How a correction system needs to work is all those parts work together. It's not treatment versus custody. That's all part of the security approach. So when you pull one from the other, the reality is you don't have enough staff to meet the demands. So that means we have to use innovation, and there's no innovation without basic information. So yes, you absolutely need oversight. And oversight, clearly the Department of Justice believes in oversight because they oversee a bunch of states. It's called the Civil Rights Division. And you can go around the country and probably around this committee and look at examples of the Civil Rights Division getting involved in states and local systems and smart leaders in those systems using that as a lever to force reform. And I talked in my written testimony about Chicago and Cook County and using federal intervention as a lever to push reform and actually get out of federal oversight. So independent oversight, and it doesn't have to be some big bureaucracy. I know that's what we like down here, but it doesn't have to be a big bureaucracy. Just the very basic of real-time reporting of data. The fact that you can't right here very easily look across your system and see key measures right now today, what's going on, and compare and identify. I hope Director Peters has that information because I don't know how you'd eat this elephant if you don't know where to start. So I think that an independent oversight is not only critical, but needed. And frankly, you'll be having the same hearing a decade from now or 2 decades from now if we do things the same way. You know, you hear the Einstein quote, but the Einstein quote that's most relevant here is that problems can't be solved at the same level of thinking that they were created. Having hearing, I mean, there's clearly bipartisan concern and will to fix this. You're choosing the wrong tools. Independent oversight has to happen. It has to be the very beginning of this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Wetzel. Mr. Fossey.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, distinguished members of the committee, and guests. I would like to sincerely thank this committee for the opportunity to present the perspective of our federal prison system from our professional, hardworking men and women, both correctional officers and employees of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The National Council of Prison Locals represents nearly 30,000 correctional professionals of the Bureau of Prisons. We take the safety of our employees extremely seriously, and it is our #1 priority as a representative organization. We look forward to working with the newly appointed director, Ms. Colette Peters, to address our biggest challenge of the Bureau of Prisons, insufficient staffing. It is no secret that the Bureau of Prisons is in the midst of a staffing crisis of epic proportions. Our numbers have declined from the January 2016 authorized complement of just over 43,000 employees. In 2017 and again in 2018, a total of 4,300 positions were eliminated, while prison violence, employee and inmate suicide rates, and contraband were all on the rise. The GAO revealed that overtime expenditures have increased 102% from 2015 through 2019. Excessive overtime, abusive mandatory double shifts, and augmentation became a byproduct of insufficient correctional officers, resulting in countless assaults on employees, inmate homicides, and a deterioration of conditions within the Bureau of Prisons. But it has not stopped there. December of 2021, we have set 2 records. the most retirements in a single month, and the most retirements in a year, or approximately 3,000 employees. The chronic understaffing of this agency has led to an unprecedented exodus. Currently, there are 34,945 active employees in the Bureau of Prisons. The new 100% is actually 80% of the mission-critical level that the agency testified to be the minimum to keep this agency safe. An additional 3,000 employees are expected to leave this agency by the end of the year. As a former director portrayed in his previous public appearance that our dire staffing circumstances were not that bad and only at a few select locations, the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General remain silent. From January 2020 to today, the media reports for the Bureau of Prisons using the phrase staffing crisis or shortage resulted in 5,400 different headlines. There is a mountain of empirical and overwhelming data that has expressly revealed an agency in crisis, and the number one underlying issue is insufficient officers and employees. The rest of the country comprehends the seriousness of our situation, but the decision makers have fallen short on the immediate steps required to rescue this agency and the human lives at stake in its turmoil. The time for studies and research is over. To succeed and safely run our prisons, we need urgent funding to fill all 43,000 authorized positions as of 2016. We need the Deputy Attorney General to demand that all BOP facilities fill all positions immediately and hold accountable those that do not fulfill this expectation. The current administration must restructure our current pay bands and make our agency competitive in a challenging economic environment. An agency-wide retention incentive for all primary law enforcement employees that are retirement eligible is necessary to curb the exodus and loss of valuable correctional experience. The men and women that work in America's prisons are extraordinary human beings that would instantly sacrifice their lives for their fellow officers. And in some instances, they will risk their own peril for complete strangers. There are several headlines that have misrepresented our agency and our employees as corrupt or wrought with misconduct. That is simply a false narrative and is not true. Although any instance of misconduct is extremely serious, and to be crystal clear, the National Prison Council emphatically does not condone, nor will we tolerate misconduct of any kind. The fact remains that the reported 100 employees since 2019 of our total 35,000 results in a 0.28% rate of misconduct for an extremely large organization. That is far from the disparaging comments from a select few with no correctional background or experience, and most that have never stepped foot inside a penitentiary or a prison. I believe the correctional professionals of the Federal Bureau of Prisons are the last line of defense between good and evil. The administration, the Attorney General, and yes, this Congress can and should fully support them by giving them the tools, resources, and staffing positions to help them be successful. Action must take place now as the environment and morale in our federal prisons continue to struggle. The employees of the Federal Bureau of Prisons have long prided themselves at accomplishing the missions given to them. They have been pushed beyond the breaking point and deserve much needed relief. They will continue to protect the American people just as they have done for nearly a century. Can you only imagine if for a few minutes our country without the American correctional officer? Thank you, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Fawzi. I was supposed to leave when Senator Booker walked in, but I wanted to wait for this panel. This issue and subject means so much to me in my career here in the Senate. And I want to start with Ms. Cardenas. It was all about you. What we did was all about you. I didn't know you. But when we passed the CARES Act and said that inmates like you had an opportunity to be released into home confinement because of the pandemic situation, I mean, it was a wing and a prayer there that this didn't all go to hell in a hurry, that we ended up with recidivism that was rampant, and those of us who supported it would pay a price for it. And so it was all about you. It was all about you when we talked about the equalization. While you were gone, she was plugging your bill. I think you were up to it, Senator Booker. But
Just for the record, I'd like to just say that it's not my bill, it's our bill that you've been championing for years.
well, and I was happy to hand it over to you in able hands. But this equalizing of crack and powder cocaine, just in my mind, it's the worst thing I ever voted for as a member of Congress, and I've been trying to undo it ever since. And so we made a move in that direction. And the First Step Act. There were 4 people who sit on this committee who stuck their necks out and actually put together an amazing political effort that ended up being endorsed by none other than President Trump, who signed the bill. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, was a major part of that, and he makes that point in his book. But the point I'm getting at is the bottom line was, I believe in redemption, personally and politically. It's a basis of my religious belief as well, and it is for many religions. When I hear your story, I say, thank God you're here today. They make me feel that some of these bills we pass and speeches we give actually do affect real people. So that's important. The other side of your testimony I want to dwell on for just a moment, the harassment, which you talked about. I don't know what the answer is, because it isn't just a matter of women in confinement who are being harassed. I'm sure that's going on in the male population as well, some for a variety of different reasons. And to think that there has to be some mechanism where a person, like in your situation, could appeal to someone for at least letting them know what happened and protection without it being used against you in a negative way seems so fundamental in our incarceration process in America. Do you have any ideas, for example, have you seen or heard of anything that works where women, let's stick with women for a moment, where women who've been the victims of this kind of harassment have recourse?
As of right now, I feel like this oversight bill would help out a lot, having a third party come in and oversee what's going on, and it would give people a safe avenue to report this stuff. As of right now, it's really difficult because what happens is we report things to IG, and then they give you a call back through SIS, who may or may not have connections to the staff member who's harassing you in the first place, and now everybody knows what's going on, and nothing comes of it anyways. Like I said, I know in my case, something had gone on while I was incarcerated, and we didn't hear back for months, and then when my coworker at the time did hear something back, everybody knew by then because the SIS staff member was friends with the officer in question. So
I'm going to look into this some more. I think this new leader in Bureau of Prisons will be open to some new suggestions. I hope she will. Mr. Fossey, thank you for saying something that hadn't been said earlier, and I'm glad you did. The men and women who are in corrections, the officers, risk their lives every day. We've got to remind ourselves of that. This is not just another job. This is a job where when you go to work, you pray to God you're going to return to your family safe and sound. And I want to acknowledge that statement by you is very important in this hearing and very important to your membership because, as you noted, 100 bad actors out of 35,000 is a pretty low percentage. I don't think the percentage in Congress would be that low if we were looking for bad actors, but I won't dwell on that subject. I'm really thinking as I go back home to Illinois and up and down the state, we don't have enough people who are applying to serve as police. We don't have enough who are applying to serve as ambulance drivers, military recruits, corrections officers. The numbers are just slumping and the retirements are rising. Your retention bonus for those eligible for retirement, I think, is a good thing for us to take a hard look at. I like that. I'm willing to join you in seeing where that leads us. But I wanted to say at the outset, thank you for putting in perspective that this is not altogether easy life. In fact, it's a challenging life that you've chosen and your members have chosen. And if we aren't honest about that, we'll never get to the right place on all the issues that face us. I have to leave and vote. And Mr. Wetzel, I'm sorry we didn't have time to get into your... if I could turn it over to Senator Booker at this point. I hand you the gavel if you need. I may regret this.
I can't tell you how grateful I am that the three of you are here right now, and your testimony, written and verbal, is just really powerful. Mr. Fossey, I want to start with you, and I want to thank you. You've just lived this incredible life of service. You were a combat veteran. You served in our military, and you have decades now in service as a correctional officer and representing a really important union, in my opinion, in the United States of America. In addition to that, you look remarkably young, but you're a granddad too, and care about your family and your children. So I just want to say thank you for being here first and foremost. You point out almost the absurdity of the staffing shortages we have right now. I mean, it is outrageous. And I talked obviously with the new director about her plan to get that done. I just want to first, just for the record, because I think there's been some interesting conversation on both sides of the aisle, this word that frankly has been now used quite a bit, augmentation, where you're taking somebody who might be in charge of certain educational things, classes, who has very basic training often. Can you just talk about why that has been abused and what the consequences of it is?
I sure can, Senator. So augmentation in its infancy began about 2008, which was about 3 years past the mission critical cuts, which was an elimination of about 20% of our correctional officer positions. Augmentation was misused, or it was used correctly at the beginning to fill in for periods of training. So we didn't have to hire an additional 20 correctional officers just to cover a week's worth of training. Where it mutated was they continued to cut staffing positions, specifically correctional officers, and those deficiencies have created this dependency on augmentation just to function. And I think it's disturbing when you see a nurse or a secretary manning a housing unit by themselves. I can equate it to me taking the good senator from New Jersey and placing you out front as the Capitol Police for today. Right. You need to secure the Capitol. That's the equation of augmentation. And who's doing your job when you're not there? It's going to be there when you get back. But more importantly, on the grander scale, if you have an emergency in a prison, you expect every man and woman that can run to that emergency to quell it immediately. That's the success. We've just reduced that response by reassigning, eliminating 20% of our staffing complement. It's a recipe for disaster, and it has created an environment that is not safe for our employees, and it's not safe for the people that we're entrusted to protect.
And Senator Sass asked some really good questions to the director and said, do you have an understanding of what percentage we're seeing of people's time? Do you have any understanding of how much it's being abused in a quantifiable measure? Like is this happening a lot in significant manners across the Bureau of Prisons?
It is beyond significant. And I believe it was the GAO had recently published a report on the use or misuse of augmentation. And there was a 42% increase nationwide. 2 of the 6 regions reported a 100% increase in a period of 3 years. So it's becoming an emergency. Not only from the correctional perspective, but the teachers aren't in the classroom. The nurses aren't in the hospital. And the offenders are paying the price for that. And I believe the American people are paying the price because we're misappropriating their money, the American people's money, to not do the job correctly.
And so can you help me? We're having a problem all across my state, which is just people wanting to get into law enforcement at all. And our state police, I think we're down like 90% in applications. And so a lot of this means we're going to have to recruit and fill positions quickly. What can we be doing to get more people to see being a correctional officer as a career path?
So I've been in corrections for 30 years, and from the great state of Pennsylvania, like Mr. Wetzel.
And Pennsylvania is great because of its proximity to New Jersey, but continue.
And we were the home of the first prison in the United States, by the way.
I did not know that.
So you have to support law enforcement, and corrections is part of that conversation. If America truly wants to sleep at night soundly and safely, There has to be men and women willing to sacrifice their lives for yours. And I believe the correctional professionals I've seen over 30 years, they're remarkable human beings, and I truly mean that. We need public support, and we need emphasis on the sacrifice that they're making to this country and their communities. And they need the tools to be successful. I think the exodus you're seeing is a level of exhaustion. They're frustrated they can't do their job. They don't feel like they're safe, and they can't make their community safe. So they're leaving. A big part of this conversation is, and I hate to use a specific name, but we did a comparison. A GL5 correctional officer, entry level into the Bureau of Prisons, starts at $19 an hour. Target starts at $25 an hour. And they don't have to worry about being stabbed to death at work.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It's economics you can't deny your family.
Two more quick questions. I'm going to go over my time because I have the hammer. Forget this new guy from Georgia.
Can you, when you're done, can you let me?
Oh, I didn't see that, sir. Somebody that completely outranks me. So I'm going to go. I'm going to come back and get some questions for the other two panelists. But I just want to ask one more thing to you. I'm very concerned about the mental health of our correctional officers. In other words, it is a high-pressure, high-stress job. And I'm not sure if there are the adequate resources to support them. I've had great work with the head of the FOP and others in letting them help to design what some of the best solutions are to give correctional officers, to give their police officers, the support that they need in a job that most Americans have no conception of how difficult it is. Do you have some ideas for me before I yield to the ranking member of some of the things you wish the correctional officers had to help them with their mental health issues?
I would say the support it falls back to resources. The agency is limited in its resources. However, we have prioritized a staff wellness policy. We're currently at the table negotiating it, first time ever, which is a priority of our council as well as the new Director Peters. But more importantly, I think we need to eliminate the stigma of help. A human being in a mental health crisis is no different than a person that has a physical injury. We take a person that has a physical injury to a hospital. But if a person with a mental health disorder, we almost ostracize them or treat them differently, like something's wrong. Well, something is wrong, but you're no less human. And we should objectify help as a good thing and support those that seek help.
Would you be open to some conversations with my staff on these issues? Because we'd love to figure out ways, maybe from a legislative perspective, we can put in place resources and programs to support our correctional officers.
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you very much. I yield to my ranking member, my friend, my partner, the great Chuck Grassley.
Thank you. Hey, I've got a long lead into the first question about a criminal activity that goes on within prisons. I'm not going to repeat that, but I understand, for you, Mr. Wetzel, I understand that criminals will often reoffend, and why is the Bureau of Prisons unable to get a hold of that problem?
Excuse me. Thank you, Senator. There's a lot of talk around staffing, and the reality is that if you have a large group of incarcerated people and they're not overseen, you have a few number of staff, people are going to default to the lowest common denominator. So when you don't have enough staff to oversee and do basic security functions, these things go by the wayside. And then we get to a place where people are arming themselves to feel safe when they're stealing to provide things for themselves. So again, it comes down, we talk a lot about correctional staffing, and I appreciate you mentioning wellness because, our staff, we need to take care of our staff. Over COVID in particular, 2 years of COVID when most of America was on Zoom, these guys are Zooming around prisons because we don't have enough staff, And security falls off first, and it happens quickly, and it's hard to get back. And then you add a lack of oversight even from a management standpoint. Management is short. You got a big department that's spread out all over the country, so you don't have internal controls, and then you all don't have the controls here to even compel getting that information. So, I think it's a construct, but when you go back, its root cause is staffing.
Mr. Fawzi, we just heard that staffing's a problem. The Bureau's budget has also increased by nearly $1 billion in the past 5 years, with much of it supposed to be for staffing. Do we know where the money has gone? If yes, where? If no, then what efforts have been taken to track Bureau of Budget expenditures, and why? What kind of cooperation has the Bureau of Prisons provided?
Thank you, Senator Grassley, for the chance to answer that question. We're asking the same question as where does the money go? And I think if you've seen the posture of our council as a whole, we're supporters of additional funding, and we see the necessity of it. But I think more importantly attached to that must be oversight. This body and your counterparts must watch where every dollar goes. And I think the fluidity of the Bureau's budget and their ability to move them between line items can tend to misuse those funds in the wrong places. And I think our staffing crisis might improve if there was a little bit of oversight on the funding that we do get.
Ms. Cardenas, I wanted to ask you, because you went through a program at Camp Bryan, Texas. How effective were those programs, and how much did you benefit from it, and in what way would you say they could be improved?
I went to Blinn College while I was incarcerated and took the accounting certificate program. That one helped me a lot because I was going to school for accounting prior to incarceration, so it just helped me stay educated while I was in there. I mainly took classes that helped me with finding job placement once I released. I think there should be more programs like that, because right now you have a lot of programs that really don't help you with rehabilitation and coming home. And I think they also probably need to focus on like counseling and things like that. But I know when I was in school, they didn't allow for you to go for like a bachelor's or a master's. And I think that would be beneficial to people incarcerated, because if it takes 4 years to learn a new trade or learn something in a new field to be able to go out and get a job, I mean, what better would that do for the people incarcerated, you know, to not rehabilitate again?
Senator Booker, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Lady and gentlemen, he is far down on the dais, but he is very near in our hearts, the senator from Georgia.
Thank you very much, my friend. And thank you to our panelists for joining us today and for the insight and experience that you're bringing to this discussion. I raised with Director Peters the legislation that Senators Braun and Durbin and I have introduced to overhaul federal prison oversight. And I want to state again that I appreciate Chair Durbin's support as the leader of the Judiciary Committee for that legislation. I want to thank you, Mr. Fossey, for your support and the Council of Prison Locals' support for that legislation, for helping us to develop it in a way that's informed by the needs of those working in federal correctional facilities, and the ways that you helped us to improve the proposal and your support of the bill. Mr. Fossey, can you explain your support for my legislation and the need from the perspective of the correctional officers who are your members and your colleagues for vigorous, independent oversight of our federal prison system?
Thank you, Senator. I think it's a pretty basic concept, and you can tell by the assembly you see in front of us. A representative of the union or the employees, a former leader of one of the largest correctional organizations in the country, and a former offender. We all believe in safe prisons because it affects everyone the same way, whether you work there or whether you live there. You're either safe or you're not. And if we're not doing it correctly, we're endangering the community around that facility. Our support for that piece of legislation is a safe workplace is a safe place for offenders to live. We have a common goal. Unfortunately, the Bureau of Prisons is a very large bureaucracy. If you do not maintain an independent avenue for oversight, a bureaucracy will abuse itself. And I think the Bureau has gotten to that point where they can't help themselves. And I think the oversight ability, even of Congress, has been circumvented by this bureaucracy. And you can tell that yourself, some of your members have had a difficult time gaining access to our facilities. Oversight is essential if you want to serve the American people correctly.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fossey. Mr. Wetzel, from your perspective, based on your experience, our legislation to establish a thorough inspection and oversight mechanism for federal prisons, do you believe such a mechanism can help improve conditions in federal prisons, both for those who work there and those who are incarcerated?
Yeah, I'd say it's stronger than that. I don't think it's going to improve without that. And we talked earlier about corrections starting in Pennsylvania, as a bunch of good things have, Senator. But what's interesting around the creation of corrections, it was really built around rehabilitation and built on this promise of man's capacity to change. We're talking about, Ben Franklin, Benjamin Rush, the Quakers. And what's interesting is, and certainly they didn't get everything right? They created solitary confinement. Penitentiary has literally had people sitting, not speaking in their cell, being penitent because they thought that was the path to rehabilitation. But what they also thought was important, and what's codified in Pennsylvania's own constitution, is independent oversight. Pennsylvania has a group called the Pennsylvania Prison Society that has constitutional 24/7 access to every correctional facility in Pennsylvania, state prisons and county jails. It had to be part of the tenet of a correction system. When you have people overseeing other people, opaqueness is a path to bad outcomes. BOP is arguably one of the most opaque organizations in the world. You're not going to get good outcomes in that context.
Thank you, Mr. Wetzel. And Ms. Cardenas, from your experience, can you speak to your perspective on the importance of transparency, on the importance of accountability, the ability of those tasked with overseeing the proper functions of government to the facilities, the relevant records and information, based on what you've been through?
I think it's important to understand that if there is no accountability, there will never be change, And I think when people are incarcerated, they're already disciplined for whatever actions happen to get them there. So then you create this toxic environment, and now they're learning to adapt to not speaking, not being able to talk about whatever's going on in there. And now they have to come home and be retrained. So I feel like if you implement those changes with the new act, I feel like we'd be able to benefit, and everybody would benefit, the staff, the inmates, and everyone, it would create a safe environment, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So,
thank you all so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
You have nothing to yield. You were 20 seconds over your time. I'll note that for the official record in Congress. I'm going to ask a little bit more questions if you all don't mind. And Mr. Fossey, I just have one more for you. And I've already whispered to my team that we got to grab you and try to work on some issues to support correctional officers. But I every time I've been going to prison since I was in law school, and I think that, again, I said to Senator Durbin, we all should have to, as part of our jobs as senators, to visit these facilities. But one of the things I've always asked, I've asked the same question since I was in law school to correctional officers and wardens, is, are there people in these prisons that you believe in your heart just don't belong here? Not that they're innocent of a crime, but often the responses I'll get is they'll point to somebody that's like 75 years old, that's been there for a long time. They're costing taxpayers an exorbitant amount of money because of their healthcare concerns. And they're like, this is not serving the public interest. We've partnered in a bipartisan way, 88 of us, to try to adjust sentencing and make it more proportionate to crimes. But I'm just curious if you have a gut feeling on some of those issues about how to get it right, that we are not spending a lot of taxpayer money, especially people that are older in our prisons. Do you have any opinion on that?
So I do have an opinion on that, and I can base that on 30 years of correctional experience and having gone from the lowest security prison camps to the highest security prison, the ADX at Florence, Colorado. I believe there is a percentage of our population that are nonviolent. They're not a physical risk to society, that may be better served in a home confinement situation. As you know, we reserve that judgment for the judicial branch.
Yes.
They decide who goes to prison and who does not.
Yeah.
But I do believe that could be part of the solution or key to refocusing some of our assets and resources on that 20% of our population, and I'm just going to be very frank with you, they're not really human. We house monsters, sociopaths that are hell-bent on killing other human beings. And some of our resources are squandered on people that probably would be better served under home confinement. And it allows these perpetrators to perpetuate criminal and heinous acts of violence.
And just an addendum to that final question, because I'm going to get to Ms. Cardenas. You probably would be one of these people that says, God, when you have somebody in there that's going to come out anyway, that is nonviolent, these programs that equip them to go out, you probably have seen 30 years that it really not only equips them when they're going out, but it stops them from coming back, right?
That's correct. And I think the staffing crisis has really deteriorated our programming aspect of corrections. And Ms. Cardenas is absolutely correct. If you want a person to succeed on the other side of the fence, it starts on this side of the fence.
Yeah.
You really have to invest in that human being, give them tools, simple things like a driver's license, a good residence and a job, get them set up for success. If you just throw them out the door, that's a strange world out there after they've been incarcerated for a period of time. And I think it's our moral obligation to equip them to be successful.
Thank you. And I mean this sincerely. Thanks for being such a patriotic American.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Wetzel. First of all, this very serious question for the record. Does your daughter know how awesome you are?
I don't know, but she thinks it's pretty cool. I'm going to steal one of these bottles of water as a cheap souvenir.
I'm going to grab you a few more then. I'm going to grab you a few more. I really appreciate you, man. I love the fact that your daughter, was your goddaughter?
My niece.
Your niece. Actually. Your niece is here as well.
Whose mom has a crush on you, by the way.
Really?
She's going to hate me.
we're gonna get a picture for her then afterwards. You've done some incredible work in this space. Besides the fact that you don't recognize that New Jersey football teams have won a lot more Super Bowls than Pennsylvania football teams. I just want to say that for the record. That is a fact. It's not up for debate.
History class. I got it.
But in all seriousness, you were involved in the Obama administration on the Chuck Colson task force, and you all had a lot of substantive recommendations that have not materialized. Am I correct?
100%. And actually, my advice to the Trump administration and the Biden administration is start with that document. That document was as apolitical as you know. It was both the Senate and the House, and it was like move all the politics out of the way. J.C. Watt was one of the co-chairs, along with Alan, I lose his last name, from West Virginia. And it really laid out a blueprint for areas of focus. And First Step Back was inspired by some of that. Interestingly enough, the person who chaired that, Nancy Levine, is now with the administration. So I think that's a really good target to get back and look at what we need to get to.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things that were done, pulling together law enforcement, advocate. It was amazing, that report. Same thing with the 21st Century Task Force on Policing, which had a lot of recommendations we still have not seen. So just for the record, and for the purposes of this hearing, can you highlight one or two things that make you lose your hair over that we haven't done yet?
Well, really everything. I mean, there really hasn't been much movement since that started. I mean, it starts with risk needs assessment. Certainly there was a risk assessment done. Some would argue that the needs assessment is incomplete and inaccurate, inconsistent with First Step Back, so we could start with that. I mean, you talk about staff and you mentioned staff wellness, and it's not directly answering your question, but I have to give you some specifics to think about around staff wellness, because I think it is the critical thing. I mean, recruiting and all that stuff. I mean, one of the issues with staffing is it takes 5 months to hire somebody.
Yeah.
In a competitive environment where you're not even paying someone's not going to wait 5 months. But you and I both played football, and I currently coach football, actually, high school football. Watch them Raiders. But I think there's not a college football team in the world that doesn't have a strength and conditioning coach. His members literally he probably right now, or chances are right now, one of his staff members is going to have to literally rely on their physical fitness to live. There's no focus, there's no discussion. There's not a corrections agency in the state who has a strength and conditioning coach.
Right.
So what corrections needs to be? Well, health, strength and conditioning, physical strength, mindfulness. It's a stressful job. meditating is good and healthy. I'm somebody who's out for a year and recovering from the trauma of a 32-year career. Trust me, I wish there had been more focus on wellness 30 years ago. Yeah. Healthy eating. You look at what food is served to correctional officers. What folks probably don't know is most correctional officers, you can't bring your own food in. You get served institutional food that's less than healthy. It doesn't benefit incarcerated people. So if we really want to make a transformative change, we have to create a healthy environment, and that looks the same in every environment. I mean, in our cities, what do we focus on when we have problems? We focus on food programs, healthy food. We focus on exercise. It's the same stuff. We need to support our correctional staff, and we need a bureau that's accountable and accountable to you all.
And it's I love that you're saying this, because I learned so much from just being embedded with my police officers when I was a mayor, and just simple things about wellness and well-being. Number one, my officers, even after they retire, their life expectancy, they're dealing with a lot of challenges, physical injuries, mental trauma from their jobs. And I don't think we really give enough credit to what's going on. But these things, folks just don't know what kind of challenges there are. And I'm grateful for you saying those making those points. And then on it all melds together, right? I know that, like, I was in some police chases, and your adrenaline gets hyped up. There's shows now that you switch out a person that wasn't in that chase, you're not going to get as much overuse of force at that point. And this knowledge, taking care of the well-being of correctional officers, helps to take care of the well-being of prisoners, right? That's a connection I can make.
So you hit on a key point. The fate of correctional staff and people who are incarcerated are inextricably linked.
Right.
There's not a construct in the world where one side's doing great and the other side's doing poor. I mean, there's not a construct, so they are linked, and even linked in a real way, in an emotional way. When you witness something horrible happen to somebody, you have vicarious trauma.
Yes.
So you feel it, you emote, right? Our correctional staff emote, and I'm glad you started by talking about 35,000 staff. And we most of the hearing, when we talk about staff, we talk about the tiny percentage that are doing misconducts. That has an impact. When all you read about is negativity, and if you look over COVID, find positive articles on correctional staff, it beats down on them. And the same thing with incarcerated people, and the framing that is us versus them. Inside on the blocks, it's rarely that.
Yeah.
The vast majority of incarcerated people identify the same people who correctional staff don't want to be in general population. There's usually not a whole lot of disagreement on that stuff.
Yeah. And because I want to go to Ms. Cardenas on just, I was embarrassed that of years and years ago in prisons, I had never been to a female facility. When I went there, I was supposed to get a tour of the whole facility, and I got stuck in population, just sitting with women for hours, listening to their stories. The tough warden, she was head of it, and I asked her how many of your incarcerated women are survivors of sexual trauma. And she stopped, suddenly didn't look so tough, looked like I could see the empathy and the pain in her. She goes, like, close to 90% of my women are coming out of horrible sexual abuse. And then when I sat down with the women and just heard stories, ridiculous stuff, like having to make their own tampons because they couldn't afford them, that their children are separated into 3 different foster homes, and trying to make calls to talk to their children with the usury rates that are being charged on those phones. But the thing that made me most compelled to try to do something from a legislative class was just the fact that the correctional officers don't often have trauma-informed care. They don't know that they're often doing things that are triggering the very women, like walking in on a woman when she's in a significant state of undress or things like that. Can you just, before I move on to Ms. Cardenas, can you just tell me your thoughts on how we are getting better, or what more that we have to do?
Yeah, so actually in Pennsylvania, we did a study on male trauma with Rutgers University. It's on our website. Rutgers, I believe, is in New Jersey. So we had to come to Pennsylvania to do a good study.
Wow.
So. You started it.
I did.
But we did a study on male trauma, and the incidence of males who were exposed to trauma was over 80%. So it's not just a female issue. But also in Pennsylvania, we really did shift our focus. Listen, unresolved trauma leads to incarceration. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So if our goal is to have people leave our system better than they came in, you have to address that trauma. It doesn't just go away. And it starts with the correctional staff. I mean, if you look at research, there was research in the, I believe, late 90s around what's effective. And one of the most impactful things is whether the correctional officer who's working on the block in a therapeutic community believed in the therapy. Correctional officers serve as role models. And so they are inextricably linked, 100%.
I appreciate you, man, more than you know, even though you've been a bit of a hostile witness. Thank you for your leadership service in this.
I have heard that once or twice.
Ms. Cardenas, I just want to finish with you. First of all, thank you for being here. I mean, you are a light to some of the best work we've done in bipartisan ways of working together, especially in the time of COVID, how we were able to make decisions with very, very limited exceptions, very small percentage, that are just success stories over and over again. You are currently enrolled in getting your graduate work in finance, is it?
Yes. I'm currently enrolled at St. Ambrose University, studying for a Bachelor of Arts in Finance.
That's truly amazing. Your story, when I read your bio and your testimony, was just made me feel good. And I know in my communities that I've lived in, lots of stories like yours. And I'm just wondering, at that point of incarceration, did that stop in your life sort of patterns and downward spirals? Because a lot of times we talk about over-incarceration, but I'm wondering what your perspective is on that, being law enforcement involved. Was that a turning point of some sort?
Well, when I was incarcerated, it was a turning point. I knew I could no longer live this life of crime. And with me getting the mandatory minimum of 10 years, well, that was a long sentence. So I felt like, okay, I need to focus on programming. What can I do to better myself? So it was definitely a turning point. But after about year 4 or 5, you begin to start getting this negative perception of the prison system. It's like, why am I still here? I feel like I'm okay now,
right.
you know?
Right.
And it's time for me to move on with my life. And it just holds you back, I feel like, in a sense, too, because you get to a level to where you can't grow anymore. And then it's like, what now?
Yeah, at the cost of significant cost to taxpayers.
Exactly,
significant cost to taxpayers. And it's our sentencing is way out of proportion to our industrial peers who have less rates of drug crimes than we do. So I'm with you on that. But I want to focus in on just this crack, powder, cocaine disparity, which you've already given testimony to. But you were involved in criminal activity that was on both sides of crack and powder cocaine. But yet you were held accountable in a much more significant way. And did you know other people in the population that fell into that hole?
Oh yes, there was a lot of them. A lot of the women that I associated with, they did have also mandatories for the cocaine and crack, and they got lengthy sentences as well. So.
And then yet you saw some people who did similar criminal activity to you, or frankly worse, but they were getting out quicker.
Yes. Yeah, if they don't have a mandatory minimum,
Right.
if they cooperate and reduce their time.
Yeah. So in some ways, what does that do to you about the sense of justice? Because often I feel in my communities that I live, this sense that it doesn't seem fair, and that actually erodes respect for the justice system. Am I?
No,
right?
you're absolutely right. I felt the same way. I'd meet a lot of women who had not worse crimes, but I guess higher level crimes, and get less time because of their cooperation, which doesn't always work, because if you cooperate, you're getting a benefit from this, and it's not necessarily always the truth either.
Okay, and then let's. I just want to end with this sort of talking about what you're talking about in the testimony about. And by the way, I think that Wetzel made a great point about, and I often don't give enough acknowledgement to the fact that men are significantly abused and experience sexual trauma as well. But can you characterize for the committee the extent of survivors that are in populations that you were in?
Yeah, there was a lot of sexual abuse survivors when I was incarcerated. I didn't realize it was 90%, but it makes sense.
No, that was this one prison. I don't.
Oh, one. I was going to say, yeah. But for the most part, there was a lot of women that were survivors, and it was very traumatic. There would be women who would cry if a man walked into the bathroom, or if male officers would stand at your cell, and just watch you for whatever reason. they do a lot of things, I think, to intimidate you and to show their authority, and I don't think they realize what kind of stress they cause the women incarcerated, you know?
And in many ways, it probably isn't malicious, it's just ignorance, yes?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And then finally, if you heard that we have a new Bureau of Prisons head, if there was a reform within the prisons that you would most advocate, sentencing is not Bureau of Prisons, right?
Right.
That's on us, that's on the Justice Branch. But if there was a constructive input about how to create more empowerment, better outcomes, what would you tell the director to focus and prioritize on?
I would tell the director to focus and prioritize on her staff with training, education, maybe even counseling to show them or to tell and express to them what kind of people they're dealing with and what things would work, and focus on education, focus on actually having the tools to teach the classes they're actually teaching. Because a lot of the time, I don't think people understand, it's inmates teaching these classes because the staff members aren't even equipped or educated enough to teach the classes that are being taught in the prisons.
Right, well, it goes to the overall staffing issue, having the right people doing the right job.
Correct.
A lot of folks in their lives go through something like you went through, get out, and they just try to go on with your lives. You are actually saying, I'm going to try to make the system better. You're coming here on your own time. You're not being paid. I just want to say it's really remarkable that you too want to make this country a better place, and I want to thank you for being here. I've kept this panel and their support teams over time. That's what happens when I get a gavel. Power corrupts. But I do want to say thank you to the witnesses. Thank you to the people that are supporting them. I just truly appreciate the director herself for being here and the panel that appeared beforehand. This hearing record will remain open. I imagine that some of my colleagues will have questions for the record. Questions for the record may be submitted by senators before 5 p.m. on Thursday, October 6th. And I hope that you all will give a substantive response as possible. I am hoping, Mr. Fossey and Mr. Wetzel, that we can work together on some really good initiatives. I think there's a lot of bipartisan space here to do the kind of things that you talked about. And I'd like to, again, I've already talked to my staff, really push hard on that. This means a lot. You may not see a lot of senators here, but this means a lot that you're here. It is a substantive contribution to an important issue. You all said this is a part of keeping America safe and strong, and for that I am deeply grateful. And therefore, I now declare that this hearing is adjourned, and I get to bang this hammer, and I'm going to bang the damn thing. Thank you.